There'll be spectacle, there'll be fantasy, there'll be daring do and stuff like you would never see.
Be a movie. Yeah, we're gonna be a movie.
Starring everybody
And me. There'll be heroes bold, there'll be comedy, and a lot of fuss that ends for us real happily. Be a movie. We can watch it all develop. Starring everybody.
And me. We'll take the world and set it on its ear.
Come on, join in. We're gonna start right here.
Oh, I didn't see you there. Hello.
Ah, yes. Good evening. And welcome to a masterpiece edition of Triple Feature. Tonight, we celebrate the cinema because cinema is an event.
Yes, it is an art form of the highest quality, one that should be savored delicately, swirled around the brain, as one swirls Merlot across the palate, to be appropriately analyzed and dissected.
Speaking of Merlot, waitress, bring me your finest vintage. Very nice.
Next
She'll be back in a
choice.
moment. Yes. Only the finest in the Radulich household that I could find in my fridge at 10 o'clock at night.
Well, one does what one can.
So, Robert, we are here to celebrate the cinema, the theater, and we were...
Your drink,
Thank you. My good man. Go to bed.
No! I must be on podcast!
Get out of here. We're fancy. All right, so why are we doing this tonight?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, Chloe Zhao's The Eternals dropped. You should be careful with that. Twitch doesn't like you drinking on camera.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, grape juice.
There we go. I have water. We can all pretend that it's not vodka. The joke, of course, being I don't drink, so it is clearly water.
Okay.
Well, Chloe Zhao's The Eternals dropped on Friday, and that allows us to potentially discuss one of the theoretically
Leave the bottle.
one of the theoretically celebrated up-and-coming quasi-auteur directors going in the world today. And this also spawned out of a conversation that you and I had. It's been kind of an ongoing, almost meta discussion about the state of film in some particular respects. As your dancing monkey continues to prattle around, we should tell him the parable of the organ grinder's monkey at some point.
At some point.
And I wanted to be able to make my case fairly clearly here, so if you'll indulge just for a moment.
Now, with all that silliness out of the way.
Yes. I have said very recently and somewhat publicly that I have lamented the state of film. Now, this is not to say that good films do not exist. This is not to say that everything that gets a wide release is a pile of crap. A lot of it is. But that's just the law of averages in some respects, quite frankly. My lamentation is based not so much that the cinema is dying. I don't think that's true. It is the bifurcation, the fork in the road. Up until the mid to late 90s, you had your blockbuster outliers. You had your high-quality art house features. This is not news. But there was a thriving, very healthy middle ground of wide-release film that was also not bad. That thought was given to, where people cared about the production, so on and so forth. And my current lamentation is focused around the fact that I think that quality of film is dying. If I might make you and I somewhat famously mentioned 5-6 years ago on a podcast, you couldn't make Dune today. And in 2016, that was true. Denis Villeneuve in 2021 made a pretty darn good Dune movie. But I might posit, rather than looking forward, let us look backwards. I don't think in contemporary cinema you could make The Lord of the Rings and have it be what it is supposed to be. there's no way the contemporary landscape of cinema would support it. You would either need to cut it down and make it more art house, or you would need to cut down all the character moments and the acting and get to the fighting more. And everyone would wonder why Gandalf didn't throw fireballs.
What's funny about that is that almost became true of the original production.
It really did. And I think in large part it existed because of the moment in time at which it was created.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you would get anything like the original Lord of the Rings trilogy today if it were to be made today. For the theater. I mean, Amazon's going to throw a pile of money at it to try and make it into a prestige television series, which, God bless, good luck.
Mm.
But that is kind of, we're losing that in the scope of cinema. We are losing the middle ground of wide release film that is also thoughtful and cared about in the production process and not designed to be purely disposable popcorn crap.
I took my kids to go see Ghostbusters over the weekend. And in 1980,
a wonderful decision.
And in 1984, and I was thinking about this, throughout the 80s, especially if you watch the documentary on Netflix, The Films That Made Us, how many movies got made throughout the 80s and in the mid-90s that were not meant to be blockbusters, but were not B movies. They were just middle-of-the-road, mid-budget feature films with famous actors, but not necessarily mega box office draws.
Yeah, that's another thing we've lost.
Will Smith won't come along till later, but there was I think about Michael Douglas, and I think it's Kathleen Turner and Jewel of the Nile and Romancing the Stone. I think about Ghostbusters with Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, and Harold Ramis. Who were Saturday Night Live players and who had been in other movies together.
I think about ironically enough, considering it features one of the actors we'll be discussing tonight, The Mask of Zorro, with Antonio Banderas, Anthony Hopkins, and Catherine Zeta-Jones.
And how one of the things that you talked about, I don't always necessarily agree with your assessment of the state of film, but I think the point that you hit on that I do agree with is the middle of the road, mid-budget feature film has been relegated to streaming services, cable television, other outlets besides the theater. And so when you open up the proverbial newspaper and you decide, I'm just going to go to the movies and see what's there, your choices are big, loud, exploding thing.
Other big, loud, exploding thing.
Or Sad Piano, the movie on one screen at 1:00 in the afternoon behind the door that says, Beware of the Leopard.
And if you're lucky, you might get a comedy that's about 30% likely to hit.
So that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight, in addition to focusing on 3 Oscar award-winning and or nominated feature films.
I believe they all won something.
2 of which actually were sent straight to streaming services. Nomadland went straight to Hulu, though it did have a run in theaters for the, so it could
enough to qualify it for the Oscars,
right? Enough to qualify for awards. And then Mank went straight to Netflix. The only one that had at least a limited release in theaters before it was available PVOD or currently on Stars is The Father. But it's an interesting thing because it used to be your prestige pictures, your Oscar winners had to be, they would get an initial theatrical run and then a second run close to Oscar season.
Yeah, that was very common until very, very recently, actually. You would see when Oscar season came around, you would get a bunch of these that were re-released to wider audiences. There Will Be Blood was one that I caught on second time through because it was in my area for a weekend, I seem to recall, on its initial run. And then once the nominations came around, it got re-released, and I was happy to go see it and witness one of Daniel Day-Lewis's most marvelous performances.
I know Pulp Fiction got 2 runs. And it was funny. I think the story of Pulp Fiction was they were going to release it, I think, over the summer. And they were like, why don't you release this closer to Oscar season? Because this looks like it would compete. And at that point, Quentin Tarantino was not the Quentin Tarantino we know today. He was still somewhat struggling. Reservoir Dogs was big for him, but was it the huge hit that Pulp Fiction would become? No, not by a long shot. And I don't think he even gets credited on True Romance anymore.
Probably not, even though he should be.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, we can sort of pepper in more lamentations about the state of the theater industry, but it is something.
So
go ahead.
Get back to your initial question about how we arrived here. There was that, so I get to make my case in this particular instance in a setting that makes sense, rather than having to try and dovetail us into something else where the conversation is not as.
I can't do this on Tuesday when we talk about Eternals.
I mean, we could, but we're not going to.
We'd lose two of the people on the conversation.
we really would. The other thing that kind of brought this about was the last couple of movies we've reviewed have been pretty bad. Like, really pretty bad. I mean, I'm not here to insult anyone that enjoyed them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's an argument for the overall quality of those films. And you had kind of pitched the idea, hey, Chloe Zhao's she's the one directing Eternals, and Eternals is coming out. So how about, and you had said that you'd been trying to get through Mank, had tried and failed multiple times.
I watched it on vacation, which was a bad idea.
And said, pick another one from this last crop of Oscar contenders, and we can do a triple feature discussing the higher art of cinema to kind of compare and contrast our normal fare. And I was amenable to that. So here we are discussing the higher art form of cinema.
So let's get into the big Oscar winner. I believe Nomadland actually won Best Picture. I have it up right now.
It did.
Okay. Yes, it was the likely frontrunner for Best Oscar Picture, which I believe which it won. Wow, yeah, here it is. The list of accolades by Nomadland.
I believe Chloe Zhao won Best Director, but don't quote me on that.
Let's see here. Jesus Christ, this won like everything.
It won a lot of things, yes.
Here we go, the Academy Award. It won Best Picture. It won Best Director for Chloe Zhao won Best Director.
Frances McDormand won Best Actress.
It was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. This is based on a book. It was I can't believe this was only nominated and didn't win Best Cinematography. And then Best Film Editing.
Remind me what won Best Cinematography?
That year.
You have the wrong list. Let me look it up.
No, 20. I got it. So it's Mank. The nominees were Mank, Judas and the Black Messiah, News of the World, Nomadland, and The Trial of the Chicago 7.
I can see the argument for Mank when it comes to cinematography. It has some strikingly good shot selection. It's just not as they're very different. Nomadland is very broad and nature based, and Mank is much more done in the style. It's shot in black and white, so it's done in the style of a black and white movie in that respect, and it's a lot more close sets. So
yeah,
I can see there's an argument for either one of them.
All right, so Nomadland, which came out in 2020, I believe when it was released, it went straight to Hulu, and then again, it had its Searchlight Pictures acquired the worldwide distribution rights for Nomadland in February 2019. It had its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival September 11, 2020, and screened at the Toronto International Film Festival on the same day. At Venice, the film won several awards, including the festival's top honor, the Golden Lion. At Toronto, the film won the People's Choice Award. It is the first film to win a top prize at both Venice and Toronto. In association with Searchlight, Film at Lincoln Center held exclusive virtual screenings of the film for 1 week, only beginning in December 4th, 2020. The film's initial release date before Searchlight delayed it to February 19th, 2021 due to concerns of COVID-19. It was released in IMAX theaters July 29th, 2021 with a wide theatrical and drive-in release in the United States on February 19th and streaming on Hulu the same day. There we go. Finally got there. All righty. And that's where I watched it on Hulu. So what is this thing, Nomadland? In 2011,
Nomadland is... Do you want me to...
Oh, go ahead. Be my guest.
You'll probably have to correct me on some of the finer points of the chronology here, but Nomadland is essentially following Frances McDormand's character of Fern, a homeless woman whose husband passed away not long after he was laid off when the gypsum mine that he worked at in the city of Empire, Nevada, closed down, and that entire city wound up drying up and blowing away like a tumbleweed. It follows her life for a period of time as she lives out of her van. She spends some time doing odd jobs, working seasonally at Amazon, working for various national parks, acclimating to the lifestyle of living out of your van down by the river. Had to do at least one. I don't even care much for Chris Farley's humor, but I couldn't let that one go. And really, and it's also, that's really all this movie does. We follow Fern around for a bit as she goes to a convention in the desert of people who live of the transient community.
There is a burgeoning a modern nomad way of life happening in the United States. People who, it speaks to the financial woes, the chasm opening up between the people who make a lot of money and the people who are the working middle class who are no longer can afford middle class. There's something that the Wire talked about, which is how the middle class was dying. And that was 20 years ago. So you can imagine what this film was like. It talks about the idea that in something that you and I have talked about before, that the person just kind of graduating high school and getting a job and being able to take care of a family and buy a house is virtually impossible now.
Oh yeah.
If you are not a skilled laborer of some kind, skilled and bonded laborer like a plumber or a carpenter or electrician, or you are not a college graduate, it is difficult, not impossible, to live the American dream, and those financial realities for people where that's how they had been living, and suddenly those jobs dried up or went overseas, or were replaced by technology.
Well, in this instance, the gypsum mine closed because the demand for sheetrock went down because we stopped building things.
Right. Well, I think that also, but that was a direct result of the crash of 2008, where
a ripple effect. Yes.
Well, there was tons of building that was going on leading up to that.
Mm-hmm.
That was part and parcel of the housing boom that caused the crash.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we stopped building because we had overbuilt by that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so the economy crashes, building stops, there's no demand for resources involved in building anymore, and those industries start to contract and in some cases go away entirely. So in any case, so there are people who, the loss of home, the loss of income, the loss of way of life is traumatizing. And some people find it difficult to try to bounce back. So one should not look at the nomad population as, well, it's just homeless people. These were people who were actively deciding they were going to live on the road. And there were ways of going about making that happen. And some people were just trying to figure out how to bounce back from it all. And then there's people like Fern, and that's the reason why I'm bringing this up. Fern, specifically, her character is stricken with a bit of wanderlust. It's something that she talks about. There comes a point where her van breaks down and she doesn't have the money to fix it, and her sister just won't send her the money, which is what she wants. So she goes and visits her sister and her husband, and there's a conversation about, it was never really about even being married or anything else. It was always about what was out there, and her husband was out there. But then she reflects upon that, saying, there were times I wanted to leave because I wanted to go back out into the world and see what was out there, and I couldn't because I was married to this guy and I loved him. But while the comfortability of house and home can and is alluring, and something that I think to a degree she does reflect upon and miss, she is also taken by this idea of living on the road and being free and not being confined, which is one shared by many people. And that's what the film talks about.
Yeah. I think it took me a while to figure out why this movie bothered me.
Okay. Why did it bother you?
Well, I need to start with the... I need to start with, this is not necessarily the most objective of criticism of the film.
Okay.
So and that's one of the reasons it took me a bit to figure it out, because I try very hard to separate as much as possible my purely personal reactions and experiences from the discussion of film craft.
Was it Frances McDormand buck naked swimming in the river?
No.
Or in the creek, or whatever that was? Because that was jarring for me. I was like, wait a minute. Why is she naked?
I mean, if you would like a discussion of the symbolism inherent there, and I can give you one, but...
No, I want you to stick to your original point and never mind my silliness.
It needs to be noted about this film that it uses I won't say it's a common trick, but it's not an uncommon trick.
Mm-hmm.
I think the majority of the actors, might be a majority, if not certainly a plurality, are not actors as such. These are real people playing themselves on camera.
Yeah, this has a very documentary feel to it.
In places it does, and I think that's part of the reason. And again, this is a thing that certain directors will do at times for various reasons, to varying degrees of success. The Outpost does this with a bunch of the military personnel that are played by these same soldiers who were in that firefight. Obviously, it's anchored by real actors, but there's a lot of the real soldiers that were there. One of the first examples I remember watching was a movie starring Matthew McConaughey and Jack Black called Bernie, which was about it's about a true crime case, the killing of a woman, and kind of what happened. And there's a lot of interviews with the people of this town where this thing actually happened, just giving their opinions on it. And it's not a documentary, it is a movie, it's a dramatization, but they just have these people play themselves, and there's a lot of that here. Like the majority of the other nomads that she meets are real nomads. Again, there's at least one major exception. Her quasi romantic interest is obviously an actor. Seen him in plenty of other things. But I believe the leader of the YouTube guy, the one who gives all the tips and hosts the convention, I believe that's him. A bunch of the people that she is seen working with in Amazon are just real people. And I don't say actors aren't real people, but you know what I mean. We all know actors aren't real people. I shouldn't even insinuate that.
Moving scenery.
That's what they should be. And I think that partially contributed to my reaction to this. And there's segments of this movie that I was profoundly bored by. And I don't mean that as a shot at the directing or the story or any of that. I remember watching this. I'm watching this going, okay, can we move on? And I had to stop and figure out why am I having this reaction, because it's not self-evident that that's what I should be. That's how I should feel about this.
Well, the movie, it takes a while to get to any kind of central conflict.
It does, but I think the reason that I was having that reaction is fairly... I don't get to say this a whole lot about Hollywood films or films in general, but I know those people. Like, not personally, but a giant chunk of these conversations that some of these people are having about the lifestyle is stuff I've heard my dad say.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I don't need the wide breadth of your father's history, but give me the relative points in 50 words or less.
Oh, my dad's always had something of a romantic notion about living in an RV.
Okay.
About being able to go and see the wonder of nature and just move around, do what he wants to do, that kind of stuff.
Wanderlust is real.
It is. And so I've heard that. I've heard other similar conversations. I think I had to kind of put myself in a different mindset to appreciate why people reacted to this movie as the way they did. Because I imagine to a lot of people, especially a lot of, for want of a better expression, city folk. And I don't mean that derisively. I mean, if you grew up in an urban setting, and that's not a cultural thing, this is purely geographic. Like if you grew up in a big city, then the cinematography here and some of the shots are going to blow your mind. The driving through a tree in Redwood National Forest, the topography of the Badlands.
Let me tell you something. This is a gorgeous country for those of you who take time to drive through it.
It really, and I think this is one of the reasons I was a little bit nonplussed by some of that is I've been to all those places.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, but most. I've been to Badlands.
So this was not a feature that took you to a strange and wonderful place.
No, not at all. I mean, I can look out my window right now. I mean, it's dark, but hypothetically, I live in the Rockies. I've got gorgeous scenery. That's not a selling point for me as such.
What I struggle with your take on this film is, for me, I couldn't. Gosh, I hate to do this because, and I don't even want to play my sound effects because I kind of want to take this seriously and not do shtick all night. But it does remind me of that second season of The Wire where they're talking about the death of the American dream, and something that you and I have talked both on and off air about how people, relate to certain politicians and certain causes because of the discomfort they're having with the way the world currently works, and it's been going that way for 30 years now.
Well, not to get too contemporarily political, but we recently had more local elections here in the United States a couple of days ago. For only at the state level. There's not going to be a more like the federal midterms are next year, but there were a lot of states that have in 2021 had their their gubernatorial races. They had state senates, a lot of that stuff. And in certain states that were not expected to break as hard to one direction as they did, they broke even harder. And it somewhat amused me to see the reaction on Twitter because someone, I forget who, so I apologize, hit the nail on the head of who would have thought that the party in plans, the party in charge, their plans of not materially improving anyone's lives didn't result in votes. and now bear in mind, I'm not saying, this is not me advocating for either political party because this has been true of both of them at various points in times. I tend to think they both are corrupt and suck and should be burned to the ground as institutions, not as the government. I mean, you can't sell me on the Democratic or the Republican parties as being virtuous at this point in time. Anyway, the point, I think you're correct in the sense that there's a lot of people that would see this and not just be taken in by the beautiful scenery, but this kind of, because parts of this would be a little bit shocking, would be a little bit experiential. Like, what do you mean they have to poop into these buckets?
Well, I think the idea of how tenuous people have a grasp on their economic comfortability and that we're all kind of living one paycheck away from, many of us, not we're all, many people are living one or two paychecks away from having to live in their car. A medical bill here, a loss of job there, a drying up of industry over yonder, and suddenly your middle class comfortable lifestyle with lemonade in the pool and 2.5 kids and the dog turns into everyone piled into the Prius that you bought. And it's like, that's a reality. And this film, Chloe Zhao, I think the master stroke that she did with this film is she spoke to that anxiety without beating you over the head with it.
Yeah, this very easily could have turned into you and I have lambasted a great number of films that have tried to be overly preachy about elements of the economic or political system.
Well, the take is this just happens.
Yeah.
We don't need to get into why it happens. But it does. It's a reality. In many cases, it's inescapable. And so there's a true human interest story in what does one do? People just don't die. They just don't shrivel and die on the vine when stuff like this happens to them. They adapt. They move on. They try to figure things out. The character that she meets, Dave, he clearly is having difficulties getting his stuff together, but when he's offered the opportunity to live with his family and then he extends it to Fern, he's one of these people who couldn't quite figure it out himself, but when he had the opportunity to get comfortable again and be, with his feet firmly planted on the ground, he took it. But then there's people like Fern who, like I said, when the idea of trauma in the loss of all of your, I don't mean this as the government program, but your social securities, your job, your home, your community, when it's all just up in smoke, there are people who are reticent to want to go back to anything like that. It's like if I'm on the road and I'm moving, and this is sort of Fern's point, if I'm on the road and I'm moving, I have more control over myself and my well-being than if I put myself back in a home and it all goes to pot again. So it's not just about tour. This isn't a movie just about touring the United States. This is a movie about somebody sort of wrestling with what to do with the next part of their life. I believe the actual book that it's based on is Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century, which I want to say I was reading, when I looked over the credits, there was something about either like a subheading of the book or another book that this alludes to, what do you do when you can't afford to retire, in the second half of your life? And this is what some people do. They give up their homes and they get in the RV and they go. And it's not necessarily because they want to tour around the world. It's because they can't afford to live in a house anymore. But I want to talk about as a film, because people listening to this review might be thinking to themselves like, okay, but what if I'm not into Sad Piano the movie? And
for the record, I heard this referred to as Sad Piano the movie, and I thought it was purely going to be about the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
Which it kind of is. But then the only score to this is just sad piano music.
Yeah, well, that's why I laughed about it. It's like, oh, we've been jokingly calling it Sad Piano the movie. And I'm like, oh, this really is a lot of. It
really is.
But it's about Fern as a person. It's about Frances McDormand really deserved her Oscar for this. She does a phenomenal job of somebody sort of tenuously hanging on to her mental health as she's trying to hold the threads of her life together in this van where she feels safe from all the trauma she suffered. But aside from that, she meets, she and Dave have this on again, off again relationship. And so the movie's somewhat about that. That's what I mean. Like you might struggle if you don't care about the subject matter and the vistas don't particularly draw you in. I don't know why they wouldn't, because this is artfully shot.
The cinematography is wonderful. And this is not, when I say that that it doesn't do a whole lot for me, that's not me saying it's badly done.
I was speaking in general, not you specifically.
It is. There are some beautiful, beautiful shots that are in this movie.
But look, if you're somebody who's like, but I this is not my kind of thing, let me tell you, it does take a while once the world is introduced to get to any kind of central conflict, and the central conflict is a bit slight. It's kind of, the expectation is this middle-aged white woman should find a home. That it's kind of like Cinderella. This young girl should find a husband and have her fairy tale ending. That's the expectation. Frances McDormand should have a home. She should have a place to live. You're kind of looked down upon as somebody who doesn't have that piece of the American dream, and she's going, but that's not my dream right now. That's not me right now. That's not where I want to be. This sucked. This whole situation sucked for me, and I would prefer not to go through it a second time, which is not something I can control. There's a lot of elements in this world that just are out of my control, and I'd rather just be in a van and keep it moving. And so as central conflicts go, like I said, it's slight. We certainly see movies with stronger ones, but that's something, though, I think, to hold on to as far as the hook. And then the rest of it is, it's a talky movie. Again, this feels like a documentary. If you don't, I think that's my one criticism of it, if I have to find one, is the drama is also slight, because there's so much. This is the part of the nomad world, and this is a part of the nomad world, and this is Frances McDormand doing a thing. This is Frances McDormand doing another thing. It takes. This movie is how long? It is
not short.
Yeah, it is almost 2 full hours long, and it takes over an hour for her to get to her sister's house, which is the only real drama in this movie. Is when she's at the sister's house, is when she's at Dave's kid's house.
There's people referred to this movie as a character study, and I don't think I agree with that characterization.
No, it's not a character study. It's maybe a topic study.
Yeah, look, you mentioned earlier this movie is not a travel log.
Mm-hmm.
It's closer to a travel log than it is to a character study.
I don't think it's a character study at all. Frances is very much somebody Frances is almost a blank slate. Outside of some like clear trauma and anxiety about going back to her old life. She's sort of just somebody I think an audience can project themselves onto.
Yeah, and moreover, there's nothing. I hate to say it this way because it seems like I'm being disingenuous. There's not a whole lot interesting about her.
No.
Like the act, which is this is somewhat of a credit to Frances McDormand as an actor because she's able to do a lot with very, very little.
Can I add something really quick? Because if I don't talk about this, I'm going to kick myself. So you brought this up because, and this goes back to the conversation of we talk so much about franchise, bombastic, big hit, blockbuster, loud, bellowing movies, right? That's kind of our stock and trade. And how in many cases, I know the Red Letter Media guys have brought this up too, how numbing it can be to where, when you
look, I'm going to go out on a limb here. You've seen The Eternals. I haven't. I'll be seeing it. I think I'm going to be seeing it tomorrow because it's a 3-hour movie. And seeing it at 11 a.m. on a Saturday is pretty much the only time I can sneak that in before we have to review it.
Mm-hmm.
But, oh no, the world's going to end again. Like, I'm glad I don't live in the MCU because threats to the existence of humanity seem to be an occurrence every other Tuesday. Like, who cares?
I was going to say, oh, look, the world is ending. It's a Tuesday.
Pretty much.
But I want to talk about this because at the beginning, the movie begins with her pulling some stuff out of storage, just enough to get in the van and get going. The rest of it's just going to sit in storage. Like the confines of her life have been stored into this garage, and she's just taking what she needs and going on the road.
It's a storage unit. I have cleaned out many of them.
And she is holding a plate, and she is reflecting and ruminating on this plate. She's holding it like it is the treasure of the Sierra Madre. And she packs it carefully and nicely and wonderfully into a box. And it's not something that she needs, but it's clearly something that means something. You don't know what it means to her. There's no voiceover or anything like that. David Lynch didn't direct this. Anyway, so she carefully, it's something she wants to take with her, despite the fact that it's probably something she didn't need, given that she's going to live on the road. In any case, so this prized possession that she has, this seemingly ordinary plate, later on in the movie, she's got ants in the van, and she's cleaning out ants.
Well, she explains the importance of that plate to one of her.
She does.
She explains it to Swanky.
Yeah,
it was her father would would go to like garage sales and estate sales and the like, and would collect stuff. And he gave her that plate on her. It was either her wedding day, or her graduation day from high school. I can't remember which one.
I feel like it was when she got married. In any case, so it's the last thing her father gave her before she went away to be married, out in the sticks with her husband, Bo. Fast forward, she's cleaning out her van. She's got ants. She's uptight. And Dave, who is trying to find an in with this woman who clearly likes her and wants to be with her and is trying to be helpful and do all the things you do as a guy to get a woman's attention. And he was like, let me help you. And he grabs the box of plates. And the box collapses, and the plates fall out and break.
The bottom falls out from that box. You gotta you gotta double check them, and you can't just lift it wholesale. You gotta give it at least a little lift first to double check.
I didn't jump a single time during Halloween Kills. Not a single death made me jump. I didn't jump at all during Venom. I didn't jump at all during Shang-Chi. I didn't jump at all during Malignant. I may have like one or two times like looked off screen. I remember we talking about that. Like there was a couple of like the tension was getting to me. But I did not jump like, the intent with a lot of like Michael Bay films, a lot of big action films is the action is supposed to be so bombastic. It should knock you out of your seat. You should jump with at least enthusiasm, if not pure fright. And I'll tell you, I don't have that reaction in most films anymore because I'm numb to a lot of it. I jumped when he dropped the box. I was laying in bed watching the movie and I was like, oh, and like, oh, and then I had this like really visceral, sad reaction. Like, first I was mad at Dave. Like, dummy, she told you she didn't need help. She's a big, strong woman who don't need no man. And she didn't want your help. And look what you did. You broke her plates. And I was so mad about it. I was so mad. But I mean, that's effective filmmaking, that
the ability to create investment in what's going on is an important thing. And I'm going to bash on the MCU here a little bit. And to be abundantly clear, this is just because it's the biggest and most obvious target that everyone understands, not because I hate the MCU. The MCU, I don't. Look, do I think their batting average has gone down over time? Yes. Am I enthused? No. But do I have a visceral hatred of it? Not really.
Okay.
Trying to get the audience to invest in characters and what's going on is one of the keys to any bit of filmmaking. The audience has to care about what's happening on screen, either because they care about the characters or because they care about what's happening in some variety. And most of the MCU movies lately have done this via the stupid method of escalating tension to the point where no one believes in their tension anymore.
Right.
Thanos is not going to win and eradicate the universe. We know this. We know you have sequels planned. What was the other one? Ego is not going to take over the known universe by utilizing Peter Quill as a battery to power his expansion. You're not going to destroy the universe. The big alien being born out of the core of the planet is not going to hatch and shatter the Earth because we have sequels planned. This is part of the problem with a lot of this filmmaking. I mean, the Fast and the Furious franchise has the same problem. Well, what do we do now? Well, can we get the stakes any higher? No, we've gone to space. Okay, but hear me out. What if they have to race around the sun? Do you not know how big the sun is, sir?
Meanwhile, Chloe Zhao's great success with this film is that she was able to produce the kind of things that Michael Bay and company long for in a dropped box of plates.
Yep. Last
thing, and then we should move on to the next film. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you everyone should see Nomadland. And this is something I talk about all because people like. One of the things I like about podcasting, as I've said before, is the dedicated talk time to a single or a handful of subjects without interruption, without having to do something else, trying to fit it in between work projects and patients and whatnot, whatever it is we're doing. When you're online at the Arby's and the guy turns around and says, "Have you seen Eternals yet?" He isn't looking for a 45-minute discussion of filmcraft. He just wants to know if you like the movie and should he see it. I get that. And so, this gives me the venue to have the kinds of conversations that I particularly enjoy and long for that I can't have in real life because there's no time and nobody cares enough. That being said, I also know that not everybody is a film person. Recommending great film to the vast majority of people is a giant waste of time.
Yep, it really is.
They're not people. There are more people like my wife than there are myself and Robert. My wife is a passive film person. Does she like movies? Sure. She likes to watch a Will Ferrell movie or an Adam Sandler movie or, Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, or something British like Downton Abbey, and she watches it and it's over and she goes about her life. The things that she thinks deeply about are not having to do with film. And the vast majority of people out there are people like my wife. And that is something I have brought up many times on this podcast. So would I recommend Nomadland to the vast majority of people? No. They're not going to get it. They're not going to like it. This is a very, very niche film, which can we talk about this? Because this is the Oscar winning, / nominated triple feature. I think Nomadland winning Best Picture was a great conversation piece because it's very telling about the Oscars. The Oscars is a film appreciation awards event. It is people who know film in theory, and this is all in theory, people who know film in theory awarding filmmakers for the films they made. These things didn't have to make money. These things didn't have to have wide appeal. They just had to be the best films of that year by craft. And a lot of people seem to think that the Oscars in particular, because I think there's like a People's Choice or another one that's actually more crowd pleasing stuff.
The People's Choice Awards used to be a bit of that. Now they're more of the Oscars crap.
Yeah, to say it's sort of a dress rehearsal for the Oscars. But I mean, the understanding that people have of the Oscars is wrong. Basically, they think it should be the most popular movie. or the most crowd pleasing. Like that's not what the Oscars is.
Yeah.
That's not what you win awards for.
That is a profound misread of what this is about. Look, I have my issues with the Oscars. I tend to think that they've become a little bit too pretentious for their own good, and that's saying something. I think they have, on several occasions, radically misread the state of the films they were discussing.
Well, they got internally political and externally political, and so
they really more so than they like that. They've always been that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's gotten worse and worse each progressive year, and the last 3 to 4 years, it's been unbearable.
So picking a film based on its subject matter because the subject matter is resonant with that particular time or the agenda of the people making those films and whatnot. You tend to disconnect with your audience doing things like that. But did Nomadland deserve to win Best Picture? Yeah, sure it did. It absolutely was one of the best made pictures of 2020. It's also not one that's going to resonate with a lot of people, and it's not one that people are going to enjoy. It just isn't.
Would this have been my vote for Best Picture of the year? I don't think it would.
Well, we can
hang on. Do I object to it winning? Not really. I certainly don't object to Chloe Zhao winning Best Director. I think her direction of this was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't think it's I'm going to put it this way. If we're talking just quality of overall film, she made a movie before this, and the name escapes me. It's something like this. God, why am I blanking on this? Because she doesn't have a lot of movies to her credit, but I looked up this one after I got a little bit of buzz.
Mm-hmm.
I will find the name momentarily. Songs My Brother Taught Me.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely kind of tend to think that's a bit more of a better film than Nomadland was. But again, I look, if you thought that one squeaked out the win based on how the voting went, sure. I'm not going to die on the look. I might try to die on the hill that Fury Road should have won the year that it was nominated. I tend to think that's a hill worth dying on. Because I think The Revenant won that year. No, The Revenant didn't win, but the director for Revenant won for Best Picture, and I forget what won Best Picture. Forgive me.
Was that the Wolf of Wall Street one?
No, Wolf of Wall Street didn't win. Might have been Searchlight.
Right,
I think Searchlight won Best Picture that year, but it's somewhat immaterial. There are certain years for the Oscars that you can look and say, okay, I'm going to die on the hill that Shawshank Redemption should have won instead of Forrest Gump. Okay, that's a worthwhile hill to die on. Fair enough. I don't think that in 2020 there was I think any of those movies that were not almost any of those movies, because if Promising Young Woman had won, I think we all would have just burned. Yeah, flip the table like that's. But if you look at like the 4 favorites, any of those could have won, and I don't think it would have been wrong.
All right, let's talk about Mank. Now,
so let us discuss how Hollywood is utterly incapable of being self-critical.
Look, I one of the things about me, I like Hollywood. I mean, look, is Hollywood perfect? No, there are people who molest children in Hollywood.
Yep.
I mean, there people abuse women, that are eager to be in pictures and don't have a tremendous amount of self-worth and will do what they need to do to get into said pictures. Hollywood is a gross, disgusting place. However, there are
almost as gross and disgusting as XPW where you worked.
I've already told that story.
I know. Look, that was your opportunity to plug your Dark Side of the Ring discussion with Pat Mullen, or if you were not so inclined to do that, to get one of our sponsors out of the way.
Yes. And what sponsor do you think we should talk about today, Robert?
Well, as far as Mank goes, there's enough music being used appropriately. You know what? No, let's do Grammarly because we're talking about a writer.
Great.
Look, Herman Mankiewicz could have definitely used help from Grammarly on some of his screenplays. Not necessarily Citizen Kane, but some of the other ones.
Can I tell you, him sitting in a bed with just buried in legal pads because that's what he wrote the script on gave me such anxiety. I was like, I was like, oh God, like Mick Foley talking about writing sex lies and headlocks. No, not sex lies and headlocks. Have a nice day on just in spiral notebooks.
Spiral notebooks.
Anyway, yes, Grammarly, which could have been effective back in the early 1900s when they wrote Citizen Kane. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2M network. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2M network to download Grammarly for free. Okay, so yes, Mank. I'm a fan of Hollywood. I like the history of Hollywood. I enjoy at least the notion that Hollywood is this magical place where dreams come true and all of that. And the actual history of Hollywood is something that appeals to me. So a self-indulgent celebration of the golden age of Hollywood, while that would, I'm sure, drive many people up the wall, which is why not a lot of people watched Mank on Netflix. I was interested in it. The more I learned about this movie back when it was competing for the Oscar, and people were talking about it, the more because with a name like Mank, if you don't understand what that's supposed to be, like that doesn't tell you anything about this movie. It's short for Mankiewicz, which is what this is who this is about. But like, if you're just like, oh, some new movie dropped on Netflix, it's called Mank, and what's a Mank? So like, I get that this would have just gone right past people, and they would have never have known it existed. But I learned about it. I heard what it was about. I'm a student of film. I enjoy the history of Hollywood. And so I knew I was going to sit down and watch this thing. I tried watching it while I was on vacation with my family. Watching this at a loud bar on an iPad was a bad idea.
Yes.
There's a lot of... Robert often talks about, I like movies that reward me for paying attention. This is a movie with a lot of detail and a lot of dialogue you have to pay attention to, or you will not understand what's happening in this movie. And it's not particularly ethereal or esoteric. It's just very dense and detailed. So go ahead and let's talk about what Mank is all about, Robert.
Well, Mank is about, I believe it was Herman Mankiewicz, in this movie, played by the great Gary Oldman. And the movie itself focuses on his writing of Citizen Kane, the seminal piece of cinema directed and starring Orson Welles. And as Mank goes about writing what is to be his masterpiece, we get a lot of flashbacks to his time in Hollywood, how he came up, him basically being a glorified con artist in some respects, his gambling habits, his alcoholism, and some of his regrets as far as life goes, and some of his biggest ones. He carries on a close friendship, a non-romantic friendship with... Oh, her name escapes me.
The actress's name is Amanda Siegfried.
Sure.
And she plays Marion Davies.
Marion, that was it. And those two become fairly close. Marion is one of the paramours of real life newspaper mogul / film mogul William Randolph Hearst, about whom Citizen Kane is very famously based.
And attacking.
Very much so. So we follow Mank's career at MGM primarily, which is where he does a lot of his work. Some of the movies that he does, some of the people that he's in the writer's room with.
Currently owned by Amazon.
Currently. And he has a handful of regrets about some of his life. Some of it he's happy to play the court jester, or the I'm smarter than all of you, but I will do the stupid things kind of character, borderline caricature of himself in some respects. His particular life starts to turn just a little bit when he makes an offhanded remark to one of the studio heads at MGM about because this is set during the, I forget the specific year, forgive me, but during the California gubernatorial race, where one of the MGM founders, I believe Mayor, no, not Mayor, sorry, Merriam, It's gonna bug me. I'll remember at some point.
You talked about Metro Goldwyn and Meyer.
Yeah, forgive me. I'm just mistaken then, I suppose. But one of the nominees for the governorship is supported by the studios at MGM in particular. He's bought in there somehow, I seem to recall. And he's being opposed by radical socialist Upton Sinclair. And the problem is that...
Hang on, if you don't know who Upton Sinclair was, he wrote a book called The Jungle, which famously made Theodore Roosevelt vomit.
And got Theodore Roosevelt to institute the Food and Drug Administration, which is today a morally and ethically and procedurally bankrupt organization. But at the time was horribly necessary because Sinclair's book was largely nonfiction. If you want to know what people were eating back in the pre-20s, like in the early...
A lot of sawdust.
A lot. And Mank makes an offhanded remark that, you people are pathetic. You can make people believe that King Kong is real and 40 feet tall and that some famous actor is a virgin at the age of 40. And you can't get people to vote against Upton Sinclair. And this particular studio head decides, you know what? You're right. How about we fabricate things? So they commence I have to bring up politics in this particular discussion because it's in the film. People complain about disinformation in 2021, and I'm not saying that it's great. But you don't have some of the most powerful media empires in the world wholesale lying to you, hiring extras to give spoken falsehoods, and then passing this off as legitimate. That's not really a thing in 2021. I'm not saying it never happens, but certainly not to this degree. And ultimately, Sinclair is defeated, and the guy who directed all these things for MGM starts to feel horrible regret about his part in this woeful miscarriage of democracy and commits suicide, and this gets Mank to spiral downward to the point where at a dinner, a Halloween party, I seem to recall, a lot of people were dressed up, Mank goes on a drunken tirade against the studio, the actors, the actresses, and William Randolph Hearst in particular. And he is then exiled because you really don't cross powerful people like that. It tends to go badly. He is contacted by Orson Welles, who is looking to go from radio into the talkies. Also from the strictly talkies into the moving pictures. Talkies would be a different joke. And wants Mank to write him something. And he gives Mank essentially full creative control over this project. He's going to edit it and whatnot for this film, but you're not going to be overseen by a director. You're not going to be overseen by a production staff. You write what you want to write. And Mank produces what would become Citizen Kane. There's a minor subplot about Mank originally agreeing not to take screen credit for this. To have been a completely uncredited ghostwriter on this project and let Wells take the lion's share of the credit. When his brother tells him it's the best thing you've ever written, his tune changes and he goes, I do want credit. This pisses off the famously short-tempered and temperamental Orson Welles. There's a brief explosive argument. But ultimately, Mank is given proper screen credit for the script. The screenplay gets made. The movie gets made. It wins an Oscar for Best Screenplay. Was famously, if you don't know the real history behind this, Citizen Kane, universally regarded as one of the most important transcendent pieces of cinema art ever, was not nominated for Best Picture, not even nominated for the Oscar for Best Picture because of the influence that William Randolph Hearst held.
Right. Meanwhile, it is highly regarded as a staple piece of film history.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you, I though my bachelor's degree is in language and literature, a useless degree.
I imagine that's up there with political science. It's something you take just to get your next step.
Yeah. I took a lot of writing and reading classes and like theater creation classes, and I'm like, oh, they all fit into this one category, so that's the degree I'm going to get.
Sure,
And,
why not?
in any case, I did take a couple of different film classes, and it was like mandatory. We had to watch Citizen Kane.
Yep, it is. Again, it's a genuinely remarkable film. But again, not even nominated because Hearst was not happy about being publicly lampooned. Wells was, I believe, nominated for Best Oscar, but did not Best Actor, but did not win, which is another crying shame. And this movie closes with, I believe, the actual audio from Orson Welles, and he was informed that he won. He gave a radio interview and said, "Well, I'm happy that it won," and he was asked a few other things, like, about not being nominated for Best Picture, and he had a kind of glib response. And, do you have anything to say to your co-author Herman Mankiewicz? He says, "You can kiss my hat, because one must keep things." Everyone knew what he meant.
In all things, class and dignity.
And then we cut over to Mank accepting the award. He was given one somewhat privately. And again, I believe Gary Oldman gives word for word what Mank was credited with having said.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, "I accept this Oscar in the same spirit in which Citizen Kane was written, without Orson Welles. Thank you very much." And then we get a little like title card at the end that, there's a few jokes in this movie about Gary Oldman, because Gary Oldman is not a young man.
Mm-mm.
Gary Oldman, he believes in his 70s. I'd have to double check that, but he's not young. And Mankiewicz was only like 55 when he died from complications due to his alcoholism. So to have this very old man, I shouldn't say very old, but have this older man playing someone 20 years younger, and and the excuse being, hard living, lots of smoking and lots of booze, and you look like this when you're 45.
This was directed by David Fincher. You might know David Fincher from his other features: Alien 3, 7, The Game, Fight Club, which we've reviewed on this network, Panic Room, Zodiac, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Social Network, which is fantastic, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Gone Girl.
You and I had very different reactions to The Social Network, just for the record.
I mean, you don't have to like the subject matter to like the movie. The movie was well done. He also worked on House of Cards, Mindhunter, and Love, Death, and Robots.
I really wish... I am so sad we're not getting a season 3 of Mindhunter. I love that show.
And then he did a bunch of music videos. This was written by Jack Fincher, who did the screenplay, and some of the other actors in this: Amanda Seyfried, as we mentioned before, Lily Collins, Arliss Howard, Tom Pelphrey, and Charles Dance.
Special shout out to Charles Dance as William Randolph Hearst. That man has an icy stare.
Yeah, it does. So look, I enjoyed this movie, but I enjoyed this movie in the way that people who enjoy movies about the self-indulgence of Hollywood tend to like those kinds of movies. I can see why this didn't win Best Picture. It was nominated, but I definitely don't think it deserved to win. Not over its competition in on this podcast. Like, yeah. I'd have put The Father over this. I think in our chat, we have some people, and I regard them. I think their opinions are important, but they are definitely not film people. They like what they like. They like movies, but they like movies in the same way that people like, steaks and candy, and rock music. Like, it makes them feel good.
I don't mean the following is an insult. I really don't. There are plenty of people who like movies the way people like McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is not an insult. This is not me saying how dare you like McDonald's food, metaphorically or literally. That's all film is to you, and that's fine. It's not going to be all things to all people in that respect.
And so when we were talking about we were going to review this, and they were like, "Well, what's it about?" And I told the group what it was about, and it was why? Like, I get that. I really do sympathize with the idea of who the hell wants to watch a 2-hour motion picture self-flagellating Hollywood.
Well,
but I mean,
that's true.
But on the other hand, some people like that sort of thing. I know I did. I thoroughly enjoyed this motion picture. I think Gary Oldman who's definitely a contender for Best Actor in this.
I think in the absence of the movie we're going to talk about after this, he might have
Yeah.
won. But look, I know everyone was falling over themselves over Chadwick Boseman because he very tragically passed, and don't get me wrong, that sucks. He was way too young.
We have covered a lot of the Oscar nominees and winners from this past Oscars on here. Believe it or not, it's like a far cry from what we normally do, but it just happened to happen this year.
Yeah.
The one that we didn't do is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Let me just address it now. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is fine. It's a talky movie. I can see where it was adapted from a play. It very much feels like a play, and Chadwick Boseman is fine in it. But had the man not died, this is kind of like Heath Ledger and Heath Ledger's Joker. There's a debate about how much he deserved to win an Oscar for that performance and how much of it was he died.
I think the primary difference there, and this might seem like a weird distinction to draw, but it is an important one because of what goes into the category. Heath Ledger won Best Supporting Actor. And I think if you look at him against the other nominees that particular year, and you discuss who did the best job supporting the cast and the story, and who did the best acting job within that capacity, I think there's a very, very cogent argument to be made in favor of Ledger's take on the Joker.
Sure.
Which is still a tremendous thing. If there was no call for Ledger to be nominated for Best Actor for the Joker, at least no real one.
Meanwhile, Chadwick Boseman is competing against Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins, among others.
And a few others, yeah. And to be perfectly honest, I don't want to say Boseman's was the weakest performance out of that group of nominees, because I'm not, off the top of my head, I don't remember that I believed that.
Hang on. Anthony Hopkins for The Father, Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal, Chadwick Boseman for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Gary Oldman for Mank, and Stephen Yeun for Minari. I haven't seen Minari, but I heard it's phenomenal. Like, in that group, maybe 4 and 5 are interchangeable, and 4 or 5 are Chadwick Boseman and Riz Ahmed. I'm sorry if that's triggering for people. I'm sorry he died, but he's not the best out of that group. He's just not.
That's
not for this performance. And I loved Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Of course. No. I mean, again, jokes aside, you're correct. Like, he did a good job. I had no issue with his nomination, but I didn't watch all of the nominated films before they came out. That's why I didn't say a whole lot about it when Anthony Hopkins won, and Twitter had a mild meltdown. We'll get to that. But yeah, that's kind of my thought process now that I've seen a lot more. I'm like, I don't think he was ever going to win that one.
No, I just he had stiff competition. There were people who made arguments for Riz Ahmed in The Sound of Metal, which I can't speak to. I haven't watched it. Anyway, back to Mank.
The point being there, I think Gary Oldman's acting is one of the highlights of this film. To the shock of no one, Gary Oldman is awesome.
But I'll tell you, Amanda Seyfried is radiant.
Yeah.
And I don't use that word very often, and it sounds very pretentious, me hearing it out loud. But I don't care.
Well, especially for a black and white movie, to glow like that is not an easy thing to pull off.
No, but you agree she pulls it off, doesn't she? She lights up that screen. The cinematography, you spoke about this with Nomadland. The cinematography of this is great because black and white, just by nature of its color paletting, is obviously monochrome and can be dull. And they somehow managed to make the whites bright and the blacks dynamic to where this is a very interesting movie to look at. Like if you watch the beginning of The Wizard of Oz, which is like black and white, like sepia toned, it looks and it's done that. It looks, I mean, part of it is the age of the film, but even if you watch like a restored version of it, it's still very much, like you said, like soup, but it's done for contrast so that when they go to Oz and Oz is so gorgeous looking, you pick up the difference. Whereas this has no contrast, so they can really focus on making the black and white pop, which it absolutely does.
This movie, in terms of the cinematography and the use of black and white as your color palette, reminded me a lot of Schindler's List, which is also shot almost exclusively. I mean, the other obvious, very, very obvious, actually, parallel to draw would be The Artist, which was done not just black and white, but as a silent film fairly recently. I shouldn't say fairly recently. It's been a while, but within the last 10 years, I think. So making a good black and white film is a bit of an art form to get the shadows to work right, to get to the point where everything still pops and doesn't, turn into this gray morass. And they did a wonderful job here. There's some genuinely lovely shots in this film. I can see why it won. There's some stuff that's incredibly well framed. The entire sequence where Mary and Mank kind of just wander the MGM compound
Mm-hmm.
is all incredibly well shot.
I talked before about podcasting for me is the activity of long form discussion with friends. That's the value of it. And watching a movie like this, which takes place in the early 20th century, where they're actually in a sitting room drinking
a lot of it
brandy, discussing the events of the day, and nobody is triggered or having a meltdown. they're no one's using tremendous. I mean, they might have back then. It's just not captured in this movie. No one's using tremendously harsh language. It's an elevated conversation. There is, Amanda Seyfried just sort of speak out of turn and sound like a dummy, which he acknowledges in the next scene. But it was like, we talk about the lost art of the discussion because social media has rendered a lot of it moot. But also people seem to have difficulty with discourse and the sharing of ideas and debate. Everyone's looking for their own echo chamber. Everyone seems to be looking for a validation of their own ideas. And when they are confronted with different ideas, differing opinions, they tend to act defensively, which ruins, again, the art of the conversation. And it was nice to see, this is a long movie. This one's also over 2 hours long. The exact time. This is 2 hours and 10 minutes, 2 hours and 11 minutes. And it was nice to see some amount of time spent on the culture of socialization in the early 20th century. A lost bit of culture, as it were. And it's something that I think would be nice. I don't know how you get back there from where we are now with the technology we have, but it would be nice to see something like that return. And I liked watching it in this film. The subject matter in and of itself didn't really matter to me. It was the ability of adults to sit around and casually drink and talk and it be nice and dynamic. Alcoholism is real. And
Is it really?
And it was captured tragically in this movie, but not in that Basketball Diaries. Your character ends with him screaming at a doorway.
It was portrayed here effectively, but it never slipped into kind of melodrama.
That's what I mean. Have you seen Basketball Diaries, right?
At some point, yes.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about with.
Yeah, I know the scene.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Ma, listen to me. You need to give me some money. Like 5 minutes later, Ma, you whore. I need money. Why are you doing this to me? Ma! So it doesn't get to that level.
You've reenacted that scene several times.
But this time on film.
You've done it on film before too, or at least on tape.
Anyway.
Okay, here's I think my big problem with this movie. Now, again, the acting is great. I don't think there's a bad performance to be had. And that's saying a lot. The guy they got to play as Orson Welles nailed the voice, which is kind of the most important aspect of that.
Sorry, I've been dying to do this on all podcasts.
All right.
Rosebud frozen peas. They're full of vitamin A and green penis. Wait, that's terrible. I quit.
I'm glad you're amused.
Go on.
I am glad you've pleased yourself.
I got my one stupid joke in.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Again, here's kind of my big gripe with this. I think the central tension of this is misplaced. And I mean that in the following way. especially with how this movie ends. And I think
Mhm.
that's my big problem with it. The ending of this movie tries to bring the narrative and the tension of this back around to the friction between Mank and Wells as they were going about the creative process to make Citizen Kane.
Mhm.
Here's the problem with that. In your 2-hour plus film, these two share less than 10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like you would this again almost feels like a documentary, documenting the process of writing Citizen Kane. And then it's not until the back half of the movie, almost the third act, before you realize the central conflict is between Orson Welles and Mank.
Yeah, they do a very, very poor job of capturing that conflict of making you care about that. Again, they talk on the phone a couple of times, and then there's one scene where Mank says, "I want credit," and Wells throws a case against the wall, and Mank goes, "That's just what that last act needs, a violent explosion before he heads off." And Wells goes, "Yeah, write it," and then walks out. like he agrees a little bit, like, "Yeah, I think you're right," and then he leaves.
Like
Then,
this almost felt like this should have been Mank's sort of spiral into alcoholism and his relationship with his wife towards the end, and that it was almost like an antecedent point that he was in conflict with Orson Welles because of the way that this movie is paced and structured.
it really is. I mean, here's the other problem with this. Again, that's a big problem. Here's, I think, the other problem, and this goes to what I said when I introduced this particular film. Hollywood is incapable of being self-critical. And here's what I mean by this. In a sane world, which you can argue whether or not we live in one.
Or be like my son and ask, what if everything you knew was a lie? True story.
Look, I appreciate his attempt to become an existential philosopher.
At 7.
Ask him how he knows he's not just a brain in a jar being fed electrical impulses.
Next time I see him.
Look, when you take him to see The Matrix, that's the discussion that has to come out of that.
Sure.
Hollywood would be able to examine not just this time period in general, but some of the whole processes, some of the power structures, et cetera, that go into making Hollywood what it is, for better and for worse. They're not capable of doing that to artists. Put air quotes around that if you feel so inclined, but that's the truth. Consequently, look, everyone would rather discuss Orson Welles' genius, which was real, than him being a violent, egomaniacal human being. People would rather cast Mank as a sympathetic, troubled figure than any other way. And the point being here, what does this lead us to when it comes to the discussion of this movie? It leads us to a point where the big turning point for Mank's character is, oh, woe is me, I inadvertently triggered a political outcome that I did not want. Oh, heaven forfend, the writer, the wit, the much put upon, crushed and cursed genius is the one person who twisted the outcome of a gubernatorial election away from poor Upton Sinclair, played by that pencil-necked geek Bill Nye, who could have saved the great state of California from the ruin that would befall it just a few short years later. Get bent. Self-insert much? Like, no. You the only way Hollywood can ever be self-critical in this particular aspect seems to be when they can draw a hard political line that they agree with. Like, no, the Republicans should never win anything. Therefore, whenever they do, we can be critical of the people who helped. But it's ridiculous. And look, that's a broader discussion to be had. I'm trying to focus on this movie. It's not like Sinclair was some great savior figure at all. And it's not like California went down the dumps. There's a reason everyone and their dog in the Dust Bowl during the Depression moved there.
Yes, that doesn't happen for another 100 years or so.
No.
California becoming a
Look. In 2020, parts of California are the world's largest outdoor toilet. Yeah, sure. Congratulations, San Francisco. You surpassed Calcutta. Like, good for you. But yeah, again, that wouldn't happen for a while. But
There's a joke in Family Guy about, every time the power goes out, Peter tells a story about Star Wars.
I'm familiar with that narrative
And
device, yes.
and so I think with the Return of the Jedi one, the power goes out and Stewie goes, "What are we in Iraq?" You could have done "What are we in Los Angeles?"
You
given
really
the history
could.
of rolling blackouts in that city in modern times, and then the joke would have been equally as funny. But they don't do that one; they do Iraq instead.
Of course not, because at the time that the time that their take on Return of the Jedi was filmed and animated, there was a Democrat in charge.
Right.
Not to go too far off that particular topic, but it's a big. I think the point here is that it leads to a slant for this entire movie that undercuts everything that this thing could have been. This movie, I think I said this to you after I saw it. This movie is not what it thinks it is.
Right.
This movie seems to think that it's a rousing excoriation of the studio heads and their cozying up to political powers and how dare they keep the little guy down, and it's not that at all. And the fact that they tried to make it that, I think, ultimately hurt the end product, which, to the credit of everyone involved, is still really good. But
Yeah.
if you want to be self-critical like that, I got some news for you guys. You
I think
have
that's the
to be
problem
able
is
to.
they made a nice celebration of the golden age of Hollywood and the people involved, and it points
Here's
to
your celebration. Here's everything that made that possible, and this we don't like.
yeah.
And you get
but
this.
as a political device, you're right, it falls flat.
I mean, there's a little bit the same problem with the most recent adaptation of The Great Gatsby, which starred Leonardo DiCaprio. That is meant to be. Ah, damn it! I gotta save my dog. That is meant to be. The Great Gatsby was always meant to be a condemnation of the excesses of the 20s. And unfortunately, the most recent adaptation turned what should have been a damning excess discussion into almost a celebration of look at how good things were, when no, this is supposed to be condemned. You have a similar problem here. We want to praise this part of Hollywood's history because look what it gave us. Look at the characters, look at the great films. Don't we all kind of yearn for this in some kind of rosy-eyed nostalgia discussion? But at the same time, everything about the world that made that possible, you pretend to hate. Maybe you do genuinely hate it. I don't mean to go too far off of that tangent, but it just leads to this horrible dissonance and a wildly inconsistent tone and a central conflict that barely gets addressed at all because it spends so much time talking about Mank being disillusioned with the entire process of what he's doing. Like, your climactic scene in most respects is him getting drunk and being told at some point, you're just the monkey on the end of the chain, right? And I'm glad you know this now at the end.
The end of all things.
And for some reason, but the movie has to keep going, and the fact that the actual process of writing this led to so much acrimony between Mank and Wells that is never really touched. Like, one scene.
Right. This movie needed to be refocused, and I think
badly.
I think David Fincher and David Lynch both kind of have the same problem. Is no one says no to them, and they fall prey to their worst excesses all the time. Like they need a collaborator, and they tend to, because they are regarded as artistes, they tend to not have them, and the people they are working with tend to just say yes to everything because they are such auteur filmmakers that what you get many times is a muddled mess of a film from both Lynch and Fincher. Whereas I think like someone giving them a hard no and another pass through editing and some reshaping of things, and a lot of their films could have turned out better. This certainly being one of them.
I don't disagree with that. So,
all right.
This is also, I think, the last thing that needs to be said about this.
Mm-hmm.
This is the least Fincher of David Fincher's movies, I think. He's got
not weird.
He's also got a very distinctive style.
Mm-hmm.
For most of his direction. And I'm not saying it's completely absent here, But if you showed me this and didn't show me a director credit and asked me to pick who I thought had done it, I don't think David Fincher would kind of top my list of people I would have guessed.
So I want to talk about the music for a second.
Considering how much opera is in the next film, yes, it's appropriate.
Fincher's frequent collaborators Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross composed the score for Mank. Forgoing their usual synth-heavy style, Reznor and Ross used period-authentic instrumentation from the 1940s to accompany the film. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, take a drink every time you have to use the phrase "as a result of COVID-19." Each member of the orchestra recorded their sections for the score from home. The entire soundtrack is composed of songs written and performed by Reznor and Ross and runs 52 tracks for over an hour and a half. There's also an extended version that runs over 3 hours with 87 tracks if you're really feeling self-indulgent. And do you know, Robert, where you can find the soundtrack to Mank?
Look, if you can't find that on Amazon Music, which we are offering a free 30 days access to, I would be shocked because there's nothing quite Nothing quite says the soundtrack to a movie attempting to excoriate the blending of politics and big business like this movie soundtrack being on Amazon.
Irony. Thy name is Mank. Anyway, yes, we are giving away a 30-day trial of the Amazon Music Unlimited service. If you head over to getamazonmusic.com/W2M network, make sure you complete and sign up complete the sign up process. And you'll get your free 30 days. You can stream all you like, and then at the end of that 30 days, if you choose to keep it, pay the monthly fee like you would Spotify or Apple Music. If not, you cancel it. No fuss, no muss, no contract. It's easy as pie. We use it all the time on the Metal Hammer of Doom. Amazon Music has just the world's largest catalog of music you can possibly find. If it's not on Amazon, it don't exist no more.
70 million plus songs, I seem to recall.
Something like that.
Huge catalog.
Indeed. Speaking of huge. Okay, Robert.
That's not an appropriate transition here.
So the next up is The Father. This one actually had a traditional theatrical release. It's currently available on Stars or PVOD, but its initial release, it had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 27, 2020. Prior to this, Sony Picture Classics and Lionsgate acquired US and UK distribution rights, respectively. It also screened at Toronto in September 14th of 2020 and at the AFI Fest in October of 2020. The film was released in India April 23rd, 2021, and in the UK June 11th, 2021. Delayed after earlier release dates of January 8th and March 12th in response to lockdowns as a result of the second wave of COVID.
So
in the
take
US,
another drink.
In the US, the film began a limited release in New York City and LA on February 26th before expanding on March 12th and then being available on premium video on demand March 26th. After originally being scheduled to be released at December 18th of 2020. The Father is directed by Florian Zeller, based on a screenplay by Florian Zeller and Christopher Hampton. It is based on the French play La Pere,
which I believe was also written by Zeller.
Correct. It stars Anthony Hopkins, Olivia Colman from The Crown, Mark Gatiss, Imogen Poots, Rufus Sewell, and Olivia Williams. And this was not going to be, of the best picture ones that we haven't already talked about, this was not going to be my choice. But I can't pick all the movies all the time by contract. So
you and I both know I don't have a contract.
So here's what the choices were that we hadn't already talked about. Nomadland was going to be on this list. Mank was going to be on this list because I'm on this podcast.
Yeah, we need those two. We had both agreed upon, and we just needed a third.
So we've already done Judas and the Black Messiah. That was Alexis and myself earlier this year on just a traditional Damn You Hollywood. Then there was Minari, Promising Young Woman, which I saw in the theaters, and I still don't feel comfortable talking about in public. Look, there's a lot of things I'll talk about. I'll talk about race. I'll talk about the Me Too thing. Promising Young Woman is one of those where no good can come of me talking about that movie.
No good can come of talking about that movie at all. It's a terrible film.
Yeah,
I don't look, that movie being nominated for as many awards as it was kind of like, I was already mostly out on the Oscars. I hadn't watched the broadcast in several years. Like, I just kind of given up on it. Like, you guys, there was a 2 to 3 year period where your Best Picture winners got more and more obscure, and it
Yeah.
felt like they were doing it on purpose.
Yeah, it was a lot of film shot in the dark behind a door that said "Beware of the leopard."
Like they brought that back a little bit with Parasite. Parasite was a
My
darn
favorite
good movie.
Oscar year is the one year everything about the Iraq War was nominated.
Yeah, it would be for you.
That was great. Like, and now your nominees for Best Picture: shooting Iraqis dead, helicopters crashing in Iraq, Afghanistan, bullets flying in Afghanistan, shooting in a cave in Afghanistan. It's like, oh my god, this has went on and on and on.
And your eventual winner, Gay Cowboys Eating Pudding.
Yes. Anyway,
so point being, like, no, like, you walked out a promising young woman going, I don't know why I didn't pee all over the screen.
Yeah. Anyway, I just was dying to get to a theater and use my AMC. It was like, you got to remember, this is like January of this year.
Point being, we were never going to talk about that one.
No. The other options were, again, Minari, The Sound of Metal, and Trial of the Chicago 7. I've seen the Trial of the Chicago 7. It's great. It definitely didn't deserve to win Best Picture. It's a talky political movie. It's my kind of movie, but like, I don't know. I think if you had not insisted of all of these, if you had not insisted on The Father, I probably would have pulled for it, either that or The Sound of Metal. One of those two.
I would have been okay with any of those. I mean, look, here's the problem with Trial of the Chicago 7. And this is, I think, the big thing that anyone's going to run up against if you watch it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an Aaron Sorkin movie. And look, that has positives and negatives that come with it. There's no getting around that. But that is kind of what it is.
I like Aaron Sorkin.
Hit and miss. Like when he is on, he writes really good. Like him at his best is really, really good. Otherwise,
he what's the line from Family Guy? He insists upon himself.
A little bit.
He can be a little that way. Anyway, so we landed on The Father, but you specifically asked for The Father, and why?
Mostly a couple of reasons. One, I love Anthony Hopkins. I mean, who doesn't?
Even in The Last Night?
Let's not discuss that. Thank you. Look.
Anthony Hopkins in The Last Paycheck.
Anthony Hopkins gets to do whatever he wants to do because he's Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins.
Sure. If Sir Anthony Hopkins wants to be in a Transformers movie because he thinks it would be cool, sure, buddy. You can do whatever you want. If he wants to be Zorro because the magic of Hollywood and that movie in particular, The Mask of Zorro, is such that you can make me believe 60-year-old Anthony Hopkins can still do gymnastics routines. Knock yourself out. He did that because he wanted to be in an action movie. He thought it would be fun. I mean, he was right. It's a great movie. Like, he does whatever he wants to do because he wants to do it. So I'm not going to begrudge him deciding, you know what? Could be fun. Like, go. You're Anthony Hopkins. Some people, look, Mark Wahlberg, shame on you for so many things. Anthony Hopkins, dude, he's already the man. The fact that he did this, like, years after The Last Night, like, I can do a Michael Bay crap fest, and then 3 to 5 years later, I'll still win an Oscar because I'm Anthony freaking Hopkins. I brought The Father up specifically because if you don't remember, the big to-do around the 2020 Oscar broadcast was they decided to, traditionally, that broadcast ends with the awarding of Best Picture. That's the last award given out. That's what closes the show. The 2021 was, they changed the order. They were going to have Best Actor as the final award given out. And this led to a lot of people speculating that everyone knew Chadwick Boseman was going to win. He had very recently passed, tragically, due to his battle with, I think it was cancer of some kind. I want to say stomach. Again, terrible. He was a talented man. No one should die that young. Cancer sucks. I'd use an epithet there, but we're trying not to get demonetized. And then the broadcast rolls around, and the Oscar goes to, and they have, I believe it was Matthew McConaughey presenting. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was. And he opens the envelope and he says, and the Oscar goes to Sir Anthony Hopkins for The Father. The Academy accepts this award on his behalf. He was not there in person because he was living in Wales and decided, I don't want to fly across the planet with all the COVID restrictions to attend your little awards ceremony. He offered to be on Zoom. Like, this is one of the crazy things to me. The director of that year's Oscars broadcast did not allow people to Zoom in. And Hopkins was one of the people who said, I'm happy to do it on Zoom if I should win, potentially. And they said, no. So he released a very brief acceptance speech on Instagram the next day because screw you. Again, because he's Anthony Hopkins and he can do whatever he wants. But there was a lot of speculation that they had set this up to celebrate Boseman's life. Here you have a wildly popular figure who's also an acclaimed actor and has died recently and can be celebrated. And I think that, look, not being conspiratorial here, I think that was pretty clearly the intention, the setup. Part of the argument that was put forth by, again, the director of the broadcast was, actors' speeches tend to be more dramatic than the directors and the production heads. Shock of shocks. One of these groups of people is a trained performer and speaker. The other is not. So that was part of the reason. And the broadcast cut off suddenly because there was no acceptance speech. There was no one there to accept it for Hopkins. They were not going to allow him to zoom in. So that was it. I believe they had someone in attendance to accept on behalf of Boseman. So forgive me for being potentially mistaken there. But it wound up being a clown fiesta of a broadcast to the shock of no one. And my thought was, of the movies that were potentially on the table, I like Anthony Hopkins. I haven't seen The Father yet. And potentially talking about the merits of his performance versus Boseman's and how that bit of drama played out might be worth the time and energy put into this particular podcast. That was kind of my logic here.
Dear Twitch, I've switched to green tea.
We believe you, Mark.
This is not beer in a wine glass or white wine.
Yeah, you can't put beer in a wine glass. It's a wine glass. It actually rejects the liquid. There's a chemical process in play. So that was kind of the thought process here behind going with The Father. As I mentioned, I hadn't seen it yet. Had I seen it beforehand, I still might have said we should talk about it. But I mean this as a compliment. This movie crushed my soul.
You want to talk a little bit about how this film resonated with you personally in 50 words or less?
Well, let's do the film first, as far as the plot goes, and then we can talk about our reactions to it. Because I mean, look, you're more empathetic than I am as a general rule, and you were a mess at the end of this thing.
Well, that's the thing. I reacted to this movie due to general empathy.
Yeah,
I have not had the unfortunate relationship issues with somebody personal to me going through dementia. My nana, my paternal grandmother, had a handful of strokes at the end of her life, and I think the last one she finally was just like, get on with it already. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
And that was sad, and I miss her to this day. One of the few relatives who I genuinely got along with, who I feel genuinely loved me for all of my failures as a human being, despite them. And she's one of the few relatives in the family that I think genuinely cares about me as a person, about me as a person, as opposed to people who are supposed to care about me because we share blood.
This wouldn't happen to be the grandmother who insisted the mafia isn't real, is it?
Same one.
There we go.
And let her have that one, okay? Little old Italian lady.
Look, this is not me trying to crush the worldview
of a dead woman. Anyway, the point being, I think my father might be touching on dementia now, but we're still, when I say touching, I mean like barely with a pinky. We're probably going in that direction, but we're not anywhere near to where I have to be worried just yet. As far as other relatives, like I said, nobody close to me has ever gone through this. So it's not like I watched The Father and I watched Anthony Hopkins play a man in the throes of dementia and go, Grandpa Mike, or Uncle Frankie, or Grandpa Larry. None of those people. That's not what killed them. So that's not why it affected me. It affected me because Sir Anthony Hopkins playing a man going through the throes of dementia was legitimately sad and broke my heart. Like I said, from a general standpoint of view, not from a personal. Go on.
So the movie itself follows, as mentioned, Anthony Hopkins as he plays a character named Anthony. Convenient. Who is an older gentleman who is going through dementia. There's some, and we follow some of his, some of what goes on here. There's one, we meet his daughter, played by Olivia Colman, who did not win Best Supporting Actress for this role, but should have.
Oh, she won like all the awards for The Crown. It's fine.
I don't care. The Crown's not interesting.
Shut up. I have like 5 seasons, 4 or 5 seasons of The Crown that says it is interesting, and Andrew Graham is going to be mad at you.
Look, you can enjoy it all you want. I can only hear them discuss how people fold napkins so many times.
Oh, move on.
Tell me I'm wrong.
I will on a different podcast.
You have the person in charge who hired the country girl, and she folds napkins thusly, but they're supposed to be done the other way, and he must talk to the queen about this.
Have you watched any season of The Crown?
No, I don't need to.
Then shut up. Oh, this is this free guy argument again. When you watch it, then complain. Go ahead.
Yeah, but
The Father.
I'm not going to put myself through that just so I can complain about it with credibility. And she is keeping him at the moment at her house. He thinks it's his at various points in time. There's a man in her life that is alternately Rufus Sewell and Mark Gaddis. There's some debate about him trying to find another full-time caretaker for him. She wants to move to Paris with Rufus Sewell. His name is, depending on which part of the movie we're talking about, either Paul or James. And I don't mean that as a negative. So there's a little bit of drama around that. He doesn't want a full-time caretaker. He feels he can still take care of himself, and it becomes very, very clear that he can't. And there's a lot of specific context that goes into this. I can't go through it. The movie somewhat defies pure plot synopsis because you just go scene by scene, and then you may as well just watch the movie.
Right.
The closing sequence is him waking up in a hospital bed. He has been moved to a nursing home, a full-time care facility. And Anthony Hopkins going, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Where's my daughter? I was in my flat just an hour ago. What's going on? And leads to him breaking down in tears, unable to fully process what's happening to him in the world around him.
Going, I want my mommy.
At one point, yes. I want someone to come pick me up from this and take me home.
The very end of the movie, he is utterly distraught and broken and crumbled, crying, I want my mommy. And the nurse is just holding him saying, let's go to the park. It's such a nice day. Let's go to the park and walk. And the nurse is kind of looking out the window, and she's realizing she's holding an 80, 90-year-old, some odd, broken, demented old man, and she's just trying to get him through the next 20 minutes.
You won't remember this in an hour. It'll be okay.
But
and that's the kind of dark humor that you get if you live with this.
She is a professional nurse, but she has to have a very human moment with this very human sick person, and you can tell that she really cares about him from a professional standpoint. That's what she's there for. She's there to care. But it's heartbreaking for her to have to sit there with this person. And so it's heartbreaking for the audience. And like I said, you didn't have to go through it personally to have your heart and soul crushed at the end of that movie, because like I was okay through a lot of it. There's enough performance in the movie and enough unreliable narrator stuff going on to keep me invested and interested in the teleplay. But then you get to that scene, and I'm tearing up now. I lost my freaking mind with that scene. The look on her face and Anthony Hopkins, reduced to what he is, going, I want my mommy. And I was glad the movie was over. I cried so hard I got a headache. Like, I had to watch Titan season 3 after just to wash the taste out of my mouth.
You'll cry after that, but for an entirely different reason.
Yeah.
What have I done with my life?
Yeah, I needed something stupid to focus on after it was The Father's a little much.
Yeah, so I suppose story time with Robert very briefly. My maternal, my side of my mother's family, my maternal grandparents, and so my mother, her sister, and her brother, so one of my aunts, one of my uncles. Their family growing up was very close with another family, close geographically to them, and they maintained that friendship through their entire lives. One of this other family's daughters has been my mother's best friend for over 50 years at this point. Those family, the associated children would routinely call the other set of parents mom and dad. They were very, very close. And I somewhat came into, as myself, my brothers, and our families they maintain contact, so we have some contact with them. And the father of that particular family, a gentleman named Gene, developed I forget how old he was. This is, closer to 20 years ago than not, which makes me feel old as dirt. He developed what was essentially Alzheimer's. They didn't call it that because the only test for Alzheimer's would come back negative, but it was Alzheimer's. He was a very intelligent, very dry-witted man. He was a literal rocket scientist. And I have a fairly clear memory of not long before he passed. When he was in hospice, he was in a hospital bed that they had moved into their house. He got to stay with his family the whole time. He was never moved to a facility. But I remember some conversations with him that were a bit circular and a bit nonsensical. And again, I was a young teenager at the time. It's kind of a shame because after I stopped being a young teenager and all the associated negative qualities that go with it, I hear frequently from both my mom and from that family that Gene and I would have gotten along. We were very much alike. And did
he complain incessantly about Marvel movies too?
He was fortunate enough to have passed before the MCU took off. I imagine he would have.
Okay. Blessed soul.
If you want an example, I suppose, of how delightfully concrete he could be, there's a Far Side comic. If you're not familiar with the Far Side comic strip, but there's one that includes a scene of a bunch of cows standing on their hind legs, just hanging out, and then someone up on a hill goes, "Car." All the cows go down onto all fours. The car drives by. As soon as the car's gone, they all stand back up. And this is funny if you appreciate the Far Side sense of humor. When Gene saw this comic, he went, "No, the biological alignment and the physiology of cows does not allow them to stand on their hind legs," which is true. But again, so I have some memories of interacting with him before he had passed on, and my maternal grandmother, whom I love dearly, is 80 something at the moment. I forget exactly. Her birthday's coming up, actually, middle to the end of November. She has been going through dementia for the last few years, and the last couple, it's gotten, it's not completely gone, but there are days, there are some good days and there are some bad days. And she lives with, at the moment, my aunt, my mother's sister, lives with her and is able to, so she's not had to be moved to a facility either. But I can there's a scene in this movie. Sorry, the long story short there is why part of this movie, why I had to watch this movie in parts. I had to get to a certain part and go, okay, I need a minute. So pause. If I'd watched this in a theater, I don't know what I would have done. Like that, and which is not saying anything rash or crazy, but I don't know how I would have reacted if I didn't have the ability to pause, process, and then come back to it in a second. Like,
I feel like you'd have been like Katie Featherstone and just snapped the guy in front of you's neck.
and then ran like the Flash. Like something. So this movie really hit. I've mentioned before, I don't have a tremendous amount of emotional buttons to push, but if you push one of them, boy, does it react. So this one really, really got to me. And again, I think if we're gonna talk about the most important thing about this movie is Anthony Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly how he did it, because I'm loosely familiar with Anthony Hopkins' process with his method because he's talked about it openly in the past. He doesn't do a tremendous amount of research. He tends to rely on the script. The script will tell you most of everything that you need to know. He also has essentially a photographic memory for words, and then he's able to discard them. So again, I'm loosely familiar with some of his process as far as that goes. And his ability to do what people with this illness do, which is almost manic.
This is going to be a weird connection to make, but stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
It had almost New Nightmare vibes for me.
Yeah.
Where you're almost afraid this is going to be permanent. It's so real. It's so visceral that, like, I'm afraid that he's going to get lost in the performance and never come out again.
Yeah. I can see that. And again, and that's to his credit as an actor that he's able to do this. But people who have dementia will have there's the one scene in particular when he meets the caretaker, and he sees her as someone who looks very much like his second daughter, who passed tragically in in some kind of accident. And he goes from outgoing and charming to very nasty and very insulting. And you do it in the space of a couple of lines, and it's all seamless.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever spent time around someone who a lot of time around someone who has something like this, they do this. And it's off balancing, because 1 minute you are talking with someone you care about, someone you love, and things are going perfectly well, and then the next you were a mistake. I don't know why I didn't encourage your mother to have an abortion. It's something like that. I've never heard that one in particular, but by way of example, and it just can come like snapping your fingers almost, but it's not broken, right? Like, it's not going from talking about what's for dinner to global warming. There's always transitions. It's always smooth, and you always wind up going after the fact, how did we get, how do you get from point A to point B? But it always makes sense along the journey. And him being able to flip that switch the way that he does is, again, it's remarkable. It's unbelievably true to life. One of the great gifts, I think, of Anthony Hopkins as an actor, he has the ability to make you believe that whenever he says a line, that's the first time he's ever said it, which is what dialogue is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And he can do this regardless of the quality of material he's working with. And I don't know how he does that. I mean, again, I could guess, but that's a remarkable gift, a remarkable talent to have cultivated. He also, over the course of this movie, goes from, in some cases, like borderline intimidating to a pitiable, and I don't mean that negatively necessarily.
Doddering was the impression I got.
Yeah. Like the scene where Mark Gaddis slaps him repeatedly.
Right. I was thinking more about the circular chicken dinner.
Yeah, there's that too. Like, I need to. Here's the last thing. The other thing I wanted to say about this movie, I suppose that I needed to say, and bear with me a little bit for this because I'm gonna make a comparison that might not make a lot of sense. This is the most effective horror movie I've seen in a long time.
It's funny. That's two in the space of a minute that where I referenced Wes Craven's A New Nightmare and yours going general horror. But that's really funny, actually.
It is, but I mean, think about it for just a second. How many horror movies, even the ones that play around with, possession or haunted houses or the few reality-based horror properties that exist, how many of them are this effective at being unsettling? How many of them can give you
Wasn't this what I said about Nomadland, where the only like action sequence of sorts is the guy dropping a box?
Yeah,
and how more effective it is than any given action sequence I've seen this entire year. And so your point is well taken. That
the sequence where the caretaker comes into the house and he's like, okay, he's a little bit like, no, I need to get dressed. I'm in my pajamas. I can't meet someone like this. I met her. I like her. I can't, no one she shouldn't see me like this. And then she comes in and it's someone, and we've met this character ostensibly. And just, it's someone we've never seen. Like, that's chilling.
Right. The scene where he walks in, the very first time you're given to the unreliable narrator perspective. When he walks into the flat and he sees what we'll find out later is actually the doctor, but he's projected the image of the doctor on his daughter's husband. And so he's there.
Yeah, he's just there.
And he's just chilling, reading the paper. And Anthony Hopkins is like, what are you doing in my flat? He's like, I live here. This is my flat. And it just sort of goes down from there. And then moments later, his daughter walks in, but it's not his daughter. It's what we're going to find out later is the nurse.
Yeah.
And like you said, horror, as we've talked about, should be unsettling, unnerving. It should make you feel uncomfortable. It doesn't always have to be about a guy being stabbed multiple times in the back with a knife and then selling the piece on Etsy, or a ninja slicing an entire cell full of women to bits, while doing the neutron dance. It doesn't have to be those silly things. It can be is this my house? Is this my beautiful wife? Or isn't it? It can be, I think the loss of one's faculties is probably the most generally accepted nightmare for most of the human race. The possibility that you no longer have any sense of what's going on around you. People talk about things like vertigo and stuff like that. Imagine you not only don't know which way is up or down, but you don't remember the people around you. You don't know what time of the day it is. You don't know where you are, and people are talking at you as if you should remember all of these things, and you just don't. And what a horribly frightening, nightmarish reality that is.
Yeah, I don't categorize this as a horror movie. And how you choose to categorize film in that respect is a long debate in and of itself.
Most Earthlings would categorize this as a drama. There's no debate about that.
Ditto. Again, I'm saying I'm not, because I think a horror movie's primary goal is to scare you. And I don't think that is this movie's goal. I think it's a byproduct.
No, but the notion that you could end up like this guy, this guy's condition is generally accepted a possibility for any number of people in the human race is terrifying.
And there are people going through this right now.
I'm going to share something about my dad real quick.
All
it's
right.
not going to take me long. But it's thinking about this out loud. It reminds me of something that my dad has said, and he was 100% serious. It's probably not something I need to share in a podcast, but I'm going to anyway. My dad has said if he ever ends up anything close to Anthony Hopkins, just take him up back and shoot him. And that sounds like he's being facetious or sarcastic. He's being dead serious. Like, my dad doesn't want to live that way. If he no longer has a connection to his faculties and he's like that, where he doesn't know up or down, doesn't recognize people. He's like, I don't want to live anymore. Just take me to Oregon and have me killed.
Yeah, there's a sequence in a television series I'm rather fond of called Boston Legal.
I thought you were going to say Hannibal.
No.
There's a sequence where they build a tableau on the beach of human body parts.
There is one of those. In fact, they turn them into a totem pole, but that's neither here nor there. Where one of the main characters is the court case essentially is putting the invalid, almost invalid father of one of the other characters on a morphine drip. Like, we would like to usher this venerable old man out of this world. He's had like a series of strokes. Like, there's and his daughter is of the opinion we should put him on a morphine drip and we should kind of be done with this at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And they go to court and there's an argument. And I mean, of course they go to court. The whole premise of the series is the act of lawyering. And one of the characters when arguing in favor of, essentially euthanizing this gentleman at this point in time, he references one of his dear friend, one of the other characters who has something. They kind of jokingly refer to it as mad cow disease. And he very eloquently articulates some of the problems with this particular, with Alzheimer's and what it brings about. That when someone is lucid, the thought of ending their life is monstrous. But the insidious thing about this disease is by the time a person gets to a point where they might rationally make the decision, I don't want to be here anymore, they're too far gone to make the rational decision.
Right.
And it is a horrible, horrible illness to try and contend with. Because, there's medication that can help, but there's only one end to that.
I see a lot of persistently mentally ill people in my profession. And I see a lot of people who are duly diagnosed, persistently mentally ill, and substance abusing. I have seen people go from rational to irrational, back to rational again over the course of a few days due to illicit substance abuse. When I first started 10 years ago at the first jail I worked in, we would see people who came into the jail and they were perfectly coherent, but they were meth abusers. And then a few days after detoxing off of meth, they would lose their freaking minds. They would be utterly incoherent. They would be hallucinating. They would be combative and violent. And we would have to place them on a psychiatric observation for a couple of days. And then their body would finish detoxing. They'd return to normal. And you'd say to them, so do you remember any of what just happened over the last couple of days where you were screaming bloody murder and, throwing things and we had to put you in a restraint chair or any of that? Do you remember any of it? No. Like, the last thing I remember is I came to jail. I was here for a day, and then I woke up and I was in the turtle suit.
I woke up 3 days later in the suit.
Yeah. And I don't know how I got here. And I'm like, okay.
Guard, would you kindly explain to me what happened?
Yeah, exactly. How did we get here? And that's, as a professional, it's something we deal with on an ongoing basis. Can you imagine being that person and how scary? I mean, imagine just waking up. I mean, I've had over the course of the last couple of years dealing with cancer, I have had a handful of surgeries. And there was the one time where they were doing the first biopsy where I almost died on the table. And apparently I was fighting so violently while, being unconscious, I pulled out whatever the thing is to keep me unconscious. So I woke up like in the middle of it and I didn't know where I was. And I had a thing down my throat and I couldn't talk and my arms were strapped to the bed. And I woke up that way. I woke up immobile, not knowing where I was, why there was a thing in my mouth. And all I could see is, and I turn and I see my wife and my mother. and like no one could explain to me fast enough what was happening. And the next thing I knew, I was out again. And I woke up the next day in the ICU with, again, a thing in my mouth and my hands tied to the bed and me going up like this and like trying to motion to the nurse and the nurse going like, and me thinking about the Joker from The Dark Knight in the hospital. I'll let you all put that one together. So, I mean, could you only imagine that just being your natural state of being forever?
Yeah, I want to give a lot of credit to all of the acting in this, but Olivia Colman just
she's fine.
Hang on. There's a look that you get when you're around people with dementia or something adjacent. And it's a hard look to pin down, but you know it when you see it.
Okay.
It's equal parts sadness and anger, a little bit of anger.
I would imagine it's feeling helpless,
a little bit of hopelessness, a little bit of I thought I was already at rock bottom. And I've seen that look on people, and it's not something that is impossible to fake. Obviously, this is an acting performance, but getting that look right, just some of the looks that she has on her face, like when there's a shot of her just in the car as it's driving away, a taxi is like driving away from the hospital, and just she's not doing anything other than looking out the window. There's not a single line of dialogue spoken, but everything you need to know is said on her face.
The scene where she has to watch her father be verbally abusive to her while he flirts with the nurse.
Yeah.
That is a rough scene to watch. I think the master stroke in Sir Anthony Hopkins' performance is the ability to come across as both sympathetic and detestable in the same scene throughout the entirety of the motion picture.
Yeah, and you can see it again if you've been around someone like this, you know what you tell yourself when this happens. Tell yourself it's not them. That's not my father. Because it's not. Whatever's going on in his brain has killed part of who he used to be.
Or it's torn down the filters.
Again, this kind of goes. This kind of depends on how far. This depends on how far the disease has progressed.
I tend to believe in that there's a lot of unvarnished hostility in people that is tapered down by relationships and affections and social contracting and the need to succeed. But you strip it all away and you see the true self. And it's a very negative, hostile thing.
I'm not saying you're entirely incorrect there. What I am saying is, again, once a disease like this progresses to a certain point, whoever you talk to, whenever you go, like if they're in a facility and you go visit them, they may not know you,
right?
And they may not remember so many formative things about their life. They may remember other things. They might remember half things, and to the point where
and hang on, think about that. Think your personality is an evolution over years of development.
Yeah.
What happens when those years of development dissipate? You revert.
You wind up again, you're talking to someone who is not whoever they used to be.
Right.
And it's a common thing. And I mean, there's a scene very early on where she fantasizes about strangling Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, well, let's be very clear. She smothers him with a pillow.
Yeah, it's an ugly thought.
Sure.
But let's not pretend, again, anyone who's been around any person like this.
Dude, there's not a day that goes by I don't want to strangle people in our network chat.
That's true. I sympathize.
You've thought about it.
It's
If you've had plans to kill Cameron Diaz, I guarantee you've thought about strangling somebody in the network.
I have never planned to kill Cameron Diaz. I don't think I'm going back in my head now. I don't think she's one of the people I've ever said I plan to kill.
Maybe planned is too strong of a word, but there was definitely conversations about this on our podcast.
Again, I'm not saying you're wrong.
No, sorry, it wasn't Cameron Diaz. It was Margot Robbie.
That one might, yeah. That's much more feasible as I think about it.
So I just remembered this from the Suicide Squad review that we did.
But yeah, it's just a human reaction to this, and there's another. There's so much about the writing of this movie and the performances that go with this that get everything about these interactions right.
It's a lot like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It's very stagey. Like
it is.
One Night in Miami, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. There was a slew of movies over this past year that were adapted from plays that I almost feel like, could you have just left them as plays and been done with it? Did these need to be? Here's the thing. I'm glad this was a motion picture that I was able to watch at home and that we're now able to talk about. I'm not saying this was a unworthwhile experience. What I'm saying is I wish someone had just sent me a copy of the play. I don't think committing it to film served the narrative or the production any more so than the actual play. I felt that way, and I felt also that way about One Night in Miami.
I think that this movie makes the best of what it does in terms of adapting from the stage to the screen. It's able to intersperse a few other cuts. It's able to make some things a bit more ambiguous. It's able to do some transitions that you couldn't do in stage. So I think this one maximizes the difference in medium, whereas other instances of going play to movie don't.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom you could have done as a play and left it alone.
Yeah, I think this one makes the most of, again, the shift without completely changing the story that they're telling. You know, you couldn't get a cutaway in the play where the daughter fantasizes about smothering him. You couldn't have you couldn't have Anthony Hopkins be slapped by someone off shot.
Right.
So you're never quite sure, was he actually slapped? Was he just imagining that? You couldn't do a transition where he walks through a door and then just seamlessly goes into a hospital that he's hallucinating and remembering his daughter's death.
I mean, you could, but it takes a bit of work.
Again, this is about how can you maximize the difference in mediums. And I think this one does. This is a small movie, that's small cast. I don't have a bad thing to say about any of it. And Anthony Hopkins absolutely deserved the Oscar for this one. Look, I don't think I lament Chadwick Boseman's passing as much as other people. I feel it was tragic. And
can we just be honest and say that if Chadwick Boseman looked like me or you, this isn't a conversation we're having a year later?
Yes, we can be honest here. That's kind of the point.
I mean, look, I'm not taking any. That's not a knock against his acting. That is not anything about his death. That is the simple statement that had Chadwick Boseman been anything but an African-American man, people are not going into social media apoplexy over not getting his perceived due.
Again, we can be honest here and we can have potentially difficult conversations. And if you happen to be watching along live on any of the various sites that we're streaming to, be that Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter live, feel free to throw a comment in here and contribute.
Well, it annoys me because, when someone's favorite actor dies, suddenly that actor gets, and this is not just actors, but we're kind of just focusing on that. They get elevated to well past the point where they actually deserve the accolades being attributed to them. And I just think it's ridiculous. Can't we look at people honestly? And I'm sad the man died. But is that now all we're going to talk about with him? He died and he died and was black and therefore deserves all the credit ever, and nobody can ever have anything else. Sir Anthony Hopkins can't be recognized for the great actor he is because Chadwick Boseman died in the same year. Like that's a specious argument to say the least.
It really is, and it's the argument people made.
It
Even
is
if they did-
the argument people made.
Even if they didn't realize that was the argument they were making.
Yeah, it drives me nuts, you know.
I sympathize with that. That's a
when Denzel Washington and Halle Berry of Catwoman fame got their
I'm not touching
Oscars, got their Oscars, and everyone was like, "Oh, Training Day absolutely deserved." No, it didn't. Denzel Washington should have won for any number of films he should have been. He's a phenomenal actor and has been in some amazing films. Training Day wasn't one of them.
Well, his performance in Training Day.
Have you not heard my on trial?
No.
I
think I've missed that one.
I described it as him pulling out his genitalia and whacking into the scenery left and right, and hitting his co-star over the head with it.
That would be Ethan Hawke, if memory serves.
It would be Ethan Hawke. I couldn't remember his name. Look, and it's not a bad performance. It's just, is it better than Glory or Color Purple?
He won. Hang on. First of all, he won for Glory.
Did he?
He won Best Supporting Actor for Glory.
Oh, okay. No, that's a bad example. A whole bunch of other. Malcolm X absolutely should have won for Malcolm X.
I'd have to go back through that particular. Again, at this point, the argument becomes what were the performances up against, and then that's a much more nuanced
anyway
discussion.
The argument was at the time, but he deserved to win for Training Day, and it's like he didn't deserve to win for Training Day. I'm glad he got the Oscar, and I don't think we should posthumously take it away from him, but that's not the year he should have won, but it's the year he did win because politics. Halle Berry, there's a much better argument for. I think it was Gods and Monsters, Ball rather.
Monsters Ball.
Monsters Ball. She wins for Monsters Ball, and I think that was a superior film of which she gave an outstanding performance. So no argument there. But Denzel Washington's the one sticks in my craw.
Well, somewhat in a similar vein, I suppose. Leonardo DiCaprio finally winning for The Revenant.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, he deserved to win for The Revenant. I'm not at any point saying otherwise, but the number of people who came out of the woodwork going, he should have won for Wolf of Wall Street. Nah. And he now only won for Revenant because of that. No, not really.
Right. Can we not give extra credit in after the year that they should have won it first? I'm like, either do it right the first time or just move on. Let's stop awarding people here's your participation trophy.
The Oscars have lifetime achievement awards.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get an award for one performance that's supposed to cover everything else.
Right.
Otherwise you get a lifetime award.
Right.
Which is
Training Day. It was we're giving you this award. It's a set
for your body of
for your body.
For your body of work, not for the performance that we're giving you an award for. And I'm with you. I think that's stupid.
No, him humping the scenery for 2 hours and beating Ethan Hawke over the head with his genitalia is not worth getting an Oscar for. As funny as it was.
I'd have to double check the other. Again, I'd have to look at the other contenders. Do you know who you think should have won off the top of your head for that year?
Not a clue.
And look, if there's a non-trivial argument to be made that if he left the largest lasting impression, while also still acting and not being and let's be clear, he might have been overacting to a serious degree.
He was.
He was not. He was not. Just a stiff on screen.
If people are interested, myself and Sean Comer reviewed Training Day and one of the early on trials, and you can hear my argument about why that movie is a little overblown. But anyway, we're here to talk about these three. So
I would agree with you that it's overblown.
Overrated.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I would agree with the general rating of that movie is a little bit beyond what it actually deserves. It does not live up to its reputation if all you have is its reputation. About the father, again, small cast, everyone gives a good performance.
Okay, here's the answer. So Denzel Washington wins for Training Day. He's up against Russell Crowe for A Beautiful Mind. No. That one could have won. Sean Penn for I Am Sam.
Could have won, but I have issues with Sean Penn.
Will Smith for Muhammad Ali and Ali. Nope.
Look, Will Smith deserves that nomination. Fine. I'm okay with that. Win? Absolutely not.
No. Tom Wilkinson for Dr. Matt Fowler and In the Bedroom.
I haven't seen that one actually.
Of this list, I think there are people who argued for Sean Penn and I Am Sam. I probably would have gone Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind, but it's neither here.
It's been too long since I've seen I Am Sam for me to accurately give that. But based on my memory of Training Day and my memory of A Beautiful Mind, I might have gone Russell Crowe. But a beautiful. I have issues with A Beautiful Mind that other people don't. So
hey, Johnny Depp was nominated in 2003 for Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. Boy.
I am aware of that. I mean, look, hang on. Set aside what Captain Jack Sparrow became, and ask yourself. Look, because after that, everyone just told Johnny Depp, "Do Captain Jack." Right? That's all that's asked of him. But going into that movie, you'd never seen him do that before. It's a really good acting job that he does, and I think that was a fair nomination.
Let's start to wrap up.
Yeah, as far as The Father, I can't recommend it to too many people. I mean, you've got to be a serious film person, and I hate to say that because it seems so pretentious, but this is a movie that you've got to really like watching the nuances of acting, writing, how certain scenes are shot, and what that tells you. Like, you've got to be into that, or this movie is not going to be for you.
Yeah, it's a well-made movie, but I always make the argument that movies should make you cry. They should make you laugh. They should make you smile. They should make you angry. Movies should invoke a feeling. I think the trap we fall into by and large is people only want movies to make them feel good.
Yeah.
Which is what drugs are for. So
there's nothing happier than a heroin addict shooting up. All you want is happiness.
So, for those people who, film as heroin, okay, I don't watch The Father. For those people who want the full wide and breadth of the film experience and all of the emotion invoking therein, you should absolutely watch The Father. It would be criminal for you not to. It is an outstanding film. I actually think it's the best of the three. Quite.
I would agree with that, believe it or not.
I don't know if it should have won Best Picture because it's a better movie than Nomadland, but more goes into making a movie than what went into The Father, and I think that's where Nomadland ekes it out.
Again, there's a debate to be had, and I would not have, having seen both of them now. Again, you ask me which one I think is better. I think The Father's a better film. You tell me you think Nomadland is, that's perfectly reasonable. That neither of those is a hill worth dying on. You should.
Here's the thing: cinematography is part and parcel of the film process. The cinematography in The Father is nil. It's a guy in a flat. And so hang on. That's not to say there's good direction. There's great shots. There's good use of the medium, as you were talking about a few minutes ago. But when you compare, not to be funny, but when you compare the vistas and the landscapes of Nomadland to Guy in English Flat, that's for me. We're talking about winning by a nose at this point.
Yeah, again,
it does.
You're arguing whether or not you prefer, again, some of the other film craft elements that went into Nomadland, or you prefer something that leans a little bit more heavily into the acting with better writing that you would get in The Father. Like, it's just a matter of preference at that point. And again, at that point, it's you disagree. We shake hands. We move on. There's nothing stupid that was said that can be made as far as the arguments go.
I will tell you, I think so. Here's where it breaks down for me. I think Nomadland deserved to win Best Picture. I think The Father deserved to win Best Screenplay.
I'd agree with that. I tend to think the screenplay for Nomadland is. Look, again, a giant chunk of this is taking real people, putting them in front of a camera and saying, be yourself, and them being competent enough to not be wooden about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I swear, if I have to listen to one... There's that scene in Nomadland where she's like she's working at Amazon, and they're all having lunch together.
Mhm.
And you have the person who's going over the importance of the lyrics that are tattooed onto their arm.
Ugh.
I wanted to put my head through a wall because I've had that
Me-
conversation.
Me too.
Okay, people with ink. If we don't ask, don't tell. If we do ask, keep it brief. And no one cares about lyrics.
My boss recently asked me, like, they changed my position at work. I do something different than what I was doing before, and it involves me being around more of the staff. And he was like, "What is your major objection to having been moved?" And I said, where I was, I could ignore everyone I was working with and just do my job. And I didn't mind, like, I was in a chaotic environment, but the chaotic environment very rarely had to do with me, and I could tune it all out and didn't have to talk to anyone. Now I'm kind of, because of the way my job functions, I have to talk to my teammates, and I'd rather throw myself off the building. And he was like, interesting. And you went into a career where you have to talk to people. And I said, we all make terrible mistakes in life. Just a point of order. It did win best screenplay.
Your response to that should have been,
Mm-hmm.
look, I'm 45 at this point. I'm kind of pot committed. You just got to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay, so best original screenplay, the winner was Promising Young Woman. Blah. Best adapted screenplay,
hang on. Out of idle curiosity, what else was nominated for best original screenplay?
Judas and the Black Messiah, which should have won.
Okay.
Minari, The Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7, which also could have won.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say all of those are better original screenplays than Promising Young Woman. Just a thought.
Yup. By far. So adapted screenplays. The Father went up against Borat, Nomadland, One Night in Miami, and The White Tiger.
Well, I'm glad it won. I think ultimately I can live with where all of these films shook out as far as their wins and losses go.
Mm-hmm.
Again, do I disagree on some of them? Sure, but none of these are hills worth dying on as a general rule.
So that concludes our discussion of high cinema, because cinema,
Yes.
dear hearts, is an event. And this Tuesday,
we have ascended. So you understand now that Mark and I are fully capable of discussing the nuance and the symbolism that goes into producing quality cinema. And this Tuesday, we're going to talk about the Eternals.
Yep, we're going to talk about the space gods Jack Kirby ripped off from DC Comics.
Hang on. No. You're doing that wrong. He didn't just rip them off from DC Comics. Who created the new gods at DC Comics?
I don't remember.
Jack Kirby.
Oh, he ripped himself
He's
off?
literally doing a parody of himself.
Perfect.
Yeah. I imagine our discussion about the Eternals will be very different because Mark seemed to have enjoyed that experience.
I did. I don't want to get into it now because we're at 2.5 hours and I don't want to be on for 3.5. So we'll talk about this Tuesday. Alexis seems to have had issues with it. We'll see what Dave thinks. But hang
on. I haven't seen it yet. I can tell you part of my issue with it right now.
The length.
A runtime of 2 hours and 47 minutes.
Yeah, it needed another
Who thought this was a good idea?
It needed another pass through editing. We'll talk more on Tuesday, but this was good. We for the Alexis, I'll give credit where credit's due. Alexis was the one that was like, why don't we talk about the Oscar stuff? And I kind of at the time was like, talk about what? But almost a year later, and we have this triple feature. This went well over the 20-minute per film that I set out for that, but this needed that. This needed a 2.5 hour runtime.
Not all triple features can be our discussion of westerns. That was pretty much bing bang done.
Yeah.
Oh, for the record, just loosely related to that, you asked briefly about with Cry Macho. Did Clint Eastwood just take the first take that everyone did? Turns out he kind of does about like 3 takes maximum per. Like he has a reputation as a director that. He goes at a pretty brisk pace. He tends to be done with the filming day around noon.
Nice.
I mean, there's kind of a story that was thrown out there. Sean Penn, after 2 days of shooting Mystic River, called his agent begging him to get him out of the contract. Clint Clint Eastwood was taking like the second or third take that he would do, and Sean Penn's like, I'm not even warmed up by take 2 or 3. And it should say something that he went on to win an Oscar for that role, Sean Penn. Might want to take a little more wisdom from the old man.
So anyway, I think, almost a year later, the wisdom of Alexis rings true, that I think there's room to discuss both the high stupidity of most films we deal with and the high art that occasionally rolls our way that we have some degree of interest in.
We have found space to talk about the low stupidity and the high stupidity and everything, and not as much in between, because as we've mentioned, the middle road is kind of eroding.
But we are, Alexis and I will actually take on some of the potential Oscar contenders. We're going to do House of Gucci, which actually isn't out yet, but will be out shortly. The Eyes of Tammy Faye, and what's the other one? The Eyes of Tammy Faye, House of Gucci, and Spencer, which actually comes out this weekend as we're recording this. Next weekend. I know that Jason wanted to talk about King Richard, which is also a Oscar contender, so we're going to wrap that into...
That's only an Oscar contender because people think Will Smith is a better actor than he is.
So we're gonna wrap that into a triple feature sometime soon, and we've hit some other ones that are on the Oscar list this year, and we'll see how many more we've already done.
The nominations will come out in a couple of more months, and then we'll know for sure.
Yeah, I know. When I shared the list with Alexis, we had actually hit a bunch of them this year, so we should be able to promote, along with the Oscars, 1 or 2 podcasts besides Soul and Tenet and Mulan.
Yeah, well, look, 2020 wasn't a great year for wide release. I mean, come on. Was 2020 a great year for wide release film in general?
It was not. All right. So
Tenet should have won.
So this past week, we Jesse and Robert Cooper talked Eternals by Neil Gaiman. We reviewed Last Night in Soho. Our Paramount Activity Next of Kin review. The video is a bit of a mess. If you watch it on YouTube, the audio is fine. It's completely intact. It's an hour of me and Robert lamenting Paranormal Activity Next of Kin, and then 20 or so minutes of Sean revisiting the first 4 movies, and then we do Rotten Tomatoes. If you watch it on YouTube, Sean's video is cut to pieces. Our review is intact. His video is cut up to pieces, and then the entire Rotten Tomatoes thing was cut because YouTube thought we were violating community standards like we do. And I wasn't going back to fix it. So anyway, so that's there. Wednesday, myself and Pat Mullen reviewed Dark Side of the Ring Season 3B. I talked about my personal history with XPW if you're interested. And now I've done that. I never have to do it again. And in the evening,
you're going to have to do it again.
In the evening time, in court, myself and Jesse Starcher and Robert
not
Cooper, wrong. Talked Ministry Moral Hygiene. On the March to Canelo versus Plant, which as we're recording this will be later tonight, we have been re-releasing some old Canelo fights. We already had up the Billy Joe Saunders and the other one from earlier this year, and then we just released Canelo versus Triple G2, Canelo versus Daniel Jacobs, and as we're dropping this, Canelo versus Sergey Kovalev. So those will be all up in the archives. We re-released our Chronicles of Riddick trilogy, and just released today, Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. We'll have live coverage of Canelo versus Plant. Robert will be re-airing the Everyone Loves a Bad Guy for Dexter in conjunction with Dexter New Blood. We have a re-airing of our Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. We'll be reviewing Titan Season 3, Eternals, as we've mentioned a bunch of times. Our annual Veterans Day show this year is myself and Andrew Graham talking Band of Brothers from HBO. Which
part? The Pacific or the other one?
The original.
Okay.
Myself and Alexis Haina are reviewing Chippendale Park Life. Ronnie Adams and I will be doing a late night review of Heels on Stars. Friday, we are re-airing our Rocky IV on trial and our Rocky IV soundtrack because Rocky IV is now back in theaters as a director's cut.
Hey, people, listen to me. listen to me. Pay attention. If you are listening to this and at all close to when this airs, go see Rocky 4 in theaters. I want it to win the weekend just because I'm weird like that.
Oh, it doesn't have a lot of competition, so.
Yeah, I think it'll beat the Eternals.
And I dove out of this plane no parachute and left Robert Winfree and Jesse Starcher going, what the hell happened to the pilot? They will be doing a conversation with Alexis Hana over the first season of What If. Good luck.
I am debating scripting out an intro for that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
If I'm gonna do it, it's gonna be a parody of the one that the Watcher gives at the start of each of those episodes. But instead of ending it with "What if," I'm gonna end it with "How come."
Okay.
That's the other what if. That's the other question that small children will ask you.
I have to be up in 5 hours. Go.
5 hours, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that'll be fun for you. All right. I cover a lot of stuff over at 411mania.com. Professional wrestling a few days a week, specifically AEW's Dark Elevation on Mondays, MLW's Fusion Alpha on Wednesdays, and WWE SmackDown on Fridays. I got done with SmackDown, put on the suit, and came here because I'm a professional and this was high-class art.
I asked my wife to bring me the goblet of wine, and
She said I'm not doing the same bit twice.
And she said, I'm not doing the same bit twice. I'm tired of your shenanigans. And I'm like, fine, I'll get my kids to do it. She's like, good. That's what I wanted you to do in the first place, and threw me out of the bedroom.
It occurs to me, as I sit here now, you had small children handing you alcohol.
Yup. Like waiters.
Oh, God.
We were doing a skit.
Demonetized.
It's a prop. We were doing a skit. There was no real alcohol involved.
Wink, wink. So yeah, I came from that. If you're interested in my thoughts on those events, go over to the Wrestling Zone to 411mania.com. Mark mentioned the Eternals review this coming week, so that'll be something. With a 3-hour runtime and the way my local theaters have apportioned out what time they choose to open the screens on the weekdays, I have to see this tomorrow at 11 a.m. Otherwise, it interferes with my entire day, Monday or Tuesday. So there's that. That'll be something. I host the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast if you're interested in the sport of mixed martial arts. Plug it in wherever you're listening to this, and you should be able to find it. Last week was a review of UFC 267 and a preview of UFC 268. Speaking of UFC 268, Saturday, the reason I'm not doing a live watch-along thing for Canelo and Plant is because I will be covering UFC 268, headlined by two title rematches, and Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler. Someone's gonna die. I say that on occasion about matchups, and I will say it about that one every time I talk about it until someone dies. So if you're interested in that, I will be over in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com, and this week's episode of the Ground and Pound Show will review UFC 268 and preview UFC Fight Night, UFC and ESPN Plus 55, headlined by Max Holloway and Yair Rodriguez. So I will give my full thoughts on that. If you're interested, please stop by. Please give the podcast a listen. I appreciate it. And on that note, Mark, I believe we have other high-class things to now go about our day and begin investing our time into.
I'm going to go home and have sex with my wife.
Gonna pull a Brock Lesnar, huh?
It's a line from Clue. You've seen Clue, right?
Not in a long time, but yes.
It's the last line I think Michael McKean says because they've accused him of being gay the entire movie. So he goes, I'm going to go home and have sex with my wife.
Methinks the character doth protest too much.
And on that note, be well, be safe, and behave.